Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Thursday, February 17th, 2022. My name is Emma Vigeland for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. Coming to you live with HD-ish. Looks good, guys? All right.
People are saying it looks crystal clear.
Oh, very nice. On the program today, James Kilgore, author of Understanding E-Carceration, Electronic Monitoring, the Surveillance State, and the Future of Mass Incarceration. Meanwhile, the US and UK claim that Russia is lying about withdrawing 7,000 troops from Ukraine's border. He said, she said, but I don't think neither he nor she want a war, even though they're posturing as such, fingers crossed. There is a massive backlog of Afghan humanitarian parole applications. The U.S. has processed less than 5% of them since July 2021 and have approved less than 10% of that 5%. So a very small amount. But it's not like we owe it to them or anything. COVID cases are currently on the decline in every state in the country, which is very welcome news. But West Virginia, Alabama, and Kentucky, all states with low vaccination rates, they're still seeing the country's highest hospitalization total.
Hundreds of thousands of extra deaths from Omicron because people didn't get vaccinated. And it's not all because of misinformation. A lot of it's because of our horrible health system, but some of it's because of misinformation.
Yep. The NFL has tapped a familiar face to represent them in Brian Flores' racial discrimination lawsuit. Former Attorney General Loretta Lynch. That's some honorable work, folks. An analysis of 40 cities has found, 40 U.S. cities, that 1 in 7 homes sold last year were bought by investors. So private equity, corporate investment, with majority black neighborhoods heavily targeted. And lastly, Amazon is being pressured to divest from Omni Air International, which it co-owns, as the airline whose logistics intermediary was also responsible for transferring prisoners to CIA black sites, has been found to have tortured and abused migrants that were being deported on its flights. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between. I hope that you're having a lovely day so far. I mean, it's looking pretty good, right? We had a tech day yesterday, upgraded some things. Feel like I'm coming to you in a more crystal clear visual situation.
And we're still working out the kinks, folks. So if there's a little bit of quality issues, we'll be addressing those in the coming days.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's get into one of these stories. This is because we're celebrating the... I'm sorry, guys. I've been messing on the chat. Do we have an echo on something? There's okay. Sorry about that. Now I can concentrate. So there's a really important primary happening, and it's going to happen soon in Pennsylvania. I think this is a huge opportunity for the left with John Fetterman surging, maintaining a significant lead in polling. And there was a piece in Politico the other day that I wanted to highlight because you rarely see pieces like this, and this is a win for the left thus far, if this is maintained. There was another Politico piece today talking about how Democrats fear that they've lost the rural vote forever. Someone like John Fetterman would be a step forward, and actually I think would have a lot of national appeal if he ever chose to run for president or something like that. Honestly, I know that there are some things in his past that he might have to overcome, but the point is that the fact that he's courting unions, the fact that he has made it a priority to reach out to rural voters, that's a huge plus, as opposed to someone like Connor Lamb. So Holly Otterbein, I believe, wrote this piece in Politico. She's done some deep dives into, there we go, look at that, leftist candidates before. Her piece is called "The Left Neutralizes the Dem Establishment in Pennsylvania Senate Primary," which is, I mean, is that up on the screen, guys? Sorry. No, it's all right. We're still working it out. Here she writes, Connor Lamb is the kind of swing state Senate candidate who used to make Democratic power brokers swoon. A former Marine and prosecutor, Lamb catapulted onto the national scene in 2018 when he flipped a House seat that former President Donald Trump carried by nearly 20 points. President Joe Biden said the young centrist lawmaker reminds him of his late son, Beau. Yet for all his pedigree as a battleground state candidate, Lamb remains mired in the Democratic primary for Pennsylvania's open Senate seat, trailing progressive frontrunner Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman in both fundraising and the polls. Even more surprising, the party establishment hasn't swooped in to help Lamb, despite the fact that Democratic leaders have aggressively recruited candidates with a profile like his to run for Senate in the past. Lamb's predicament offers a window into how much the Democratic Party has changed in recent years. Progressives have gained a major foothold, small dollar fundraising has upended election dynamics, and moderate white men like Lamb are no longer shoo-ins. But this, in terms of a Senate primary, I feel this is fairly unprecedented for a candidate like Fetterman to be holding on to this lead when you do have someone like Connor Lamb, who the piece will go into later, how it's not like he's completely without funds. The infamous James Carville is working with some sort of super PAC to help fund his effort here, naturally. But he, despite having all the pedigree that basically Democratic establishment types have appreciated in the past, he's been unable to make leads and make gains in polling commensurate with the hype that he gets. He was quoted in this piece saying, if online fundraising was what determined these elections, you'd have either Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump as the president, which is interesting because Donald Trump was the president. That's a little bit further down. Donald Trump used to be the president. He's no longer the president, but that was a huge part of why he actually won, was the fact that he did have grassroots support.
I mean, both parties have, particularly rural voters, have completely forgotten them. And from the Democrat Party, like the policy stuff, I think is kind of clear. A lot of folks need things like healthcare,
right?
And rural hospitals need an injection. I think Bernie was only particularly good on this, although I don't think it got the emphasis it needed. But
it's also just not important to, and not applicable to make a comparison between a presidential run and a Senate run. When it comes to these races, congressional races, Senate races, no, small dollars actually are a pretty good indicator. And it's not just small dollars coming in from outside. He's kind of doing an outside-inside strategy here, Fetterman, and he's making sure that he courts a lot of the local unions and the groups in Pennsylvania that, you know, he supports and that support him. Fetterman, the only candidate in the Democratic field who has run and won statewide, is leading in public and private polls. Last year, Fetterman also raised nearly $12 million from a massive network of small dollar donors, compared to $4 million for Lamb. So again, he's started running early. He's had success in that area. And Connor Lamb is trying to keep up with some of the super PAC money that's flowing in. But as I mentioned, it's not just the small dollar donors. It's also the content and the way that Fetterman is running his campaign that makes me encouraged. A recent development could help Lamb to close the money gap with Fetterman, as I mentioned earlier. A pro-Lamb super PAC, which is looking to raise more than $8 million, has emerged. A document promoting the group listed the firm founded by Biden's pollster, John Anzalone as a part of the team, and of course James Carville is involved as well, sending out emails on his behalf. But the point is, this is an encouraging race, and I think that it behooves the left to get behind Fetterman here. He has a real chance of winning not just the primary, but the general. He has the pedigree of being the lieutenant governor. He has the strategy that I think is accurate, and he has a lot of the politics that we subscribe to here on the show. And the fact that he is running towards unions makes me very excited.
Yeah, I mean, I think like these things are fairly clear when people like James Carville get involved with candidates like Lamb.
Right. But let's also turn to another state, the one that we're currently in, not just Pennsylvania, because there have been constant claims from New Yorkers and whining about crime, basically. And it's usually from really wealthy people. If you guys saw that unhinged Andy Cohen rant on New Year's Eve about how the worst mayor is finally leaving the city, that's pretty much what you get when you talk to wealthy New Yorkers about de Blasio versus Eric Adams. There's no specifics whatsoever. There's just a sense that crime is really out of control. And then like what you follow up, what's the next thing he did that you don't like? That's basically it. But Eric Adams believes that pushing a tough on crime stance is going to be his bread and butter as the mayor of New York. So much so that he's kind of fudging the numbers. Well, not fudging the numbers, but at the very least fudging the graph.
No, this is fudging the numbers.
Okay, look at this. Look, if you guys can see this, look at this graph.
Major and violent crime has increased. And
Right.
Yes. So now.
So they show that in between 2017 and 2021, major and violent crime has increased. And that orange bar, it looks huge. It looks massive.
It was literally double the size of any of the other.
Right. I mean, wow.
So looks like we've had like just eyeballing this from a distance away, it'd see a 250% increase in violent crime. Is that what this shows?
If you look really closely at the fine print, in fact, it does not. This was pointed out by Brad Lander on Twitter. 7.5% of an increase between 2017 and 2021. That is because of the pandemic, basically.
Yeah, like that's the thing is like people say the left doesn't care about this sort of stuff, and like I'll say like I know. Oh, so let me cut back to Emma away from our screen there. Like if you know people that work retail, like there is a change that's happened during the pandemic because people are a little bit more desperate. So you see a lot more stuff of people trying to get through checkout lines and I guess like maybe we'll try to sneak some stuff in the cart or maybe just try to walk through stuff and it's often stuff like diapers and it's horrible. And it is a crime that we've left people to such desperate like measures for this stuff. And like, sure, there might be certain technological things like people can, move this merchandise that they steal better. That's leading to some of like the higher profile things that you're seeing. But guess what? There's a supply and demand side of this thing. And maybe this on the technology on the supply side is made easier, but there's also a demand side where people need to buy detergent for cheaper than they have it at the main stores. And what does that say about what we're doing to folks? As we have Jen Psaki saying, like, we don't want to incentivize people to sit at home. We want them to get back to work and basically serve the economy. Like this is the price you have to pay.
Yes, because people, as you say, people are increasingly desperate. And so, to be fair, Matt, here Eric Adams, despite the misleading chart that seems to show that violent and major crime has increased by 1,000,000% when it's 7.5% over 4 years, maybe it's different when it comes to petty crime. Just kidding. Judd Legum of Popular Information, which is a great newsletter, crunched the numbers a few days ago on this. According to the data, there is a modest rise in reported shoplifting incidents compared to the year before the pandemic began. There were 3,718 complaints of retail thefts citywide in 2019 and 43,864 such complaints in 2021, an increase of about 15%. But complaints are not a perfect measure of crime trends because not all thefts are reported. Fine. But it's a 15% increase in shoplifting over that period of time, which that period of time tracks entirely with an increase in precarity, a desperation due to the pandemic, people losing their jobs, people unable to work or maybe having to leave their jobs because they have to take care of their kids who are at home or their workplace is unsafe. I mean, that is exactly what happens when we're in a dire economic situation. So there is no reason to panic. And yet, it seems like for Eric Adams, it's actually quite beneficial to create a panic and ride that wave, which is why we see that misrepresentation of data.
I mean, it was a big wave to ride in the 90s. And I think you will see the Democrat, especially like the ones who are rooting for Eric Adams in this, return to a playbook like that before they go to some like more radical measures that might actually like address the root causes of this sort of stuff.
And we should also say that Eric Adams did just propose his $98 billion budget, 0 cuts to the NYPD. So everybody who said that Derek, we had national Democrats saying Nancy Pelosi, people like that, Chauvin's conviction, it was a historic moment. Well, the fact that it was important
about you
that
guys
he got convicted, right? It was a historic moment for you because now you don't have to worry about any systemic change. And then we're also seeing this here in New York, of course. All right, we have to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will be joined by James Kilgore. We are back, and we are joined by James Kilgore, longtime leftist activist and author of Understanding E-Carceration, Electronic Monitoring, the Surveillance State, and the Future of Mass Incarceration. James, thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited to talk to you because your book talks a little bit about your firsthand experience being under state surveillance for much of your adulthood. But I also Wikipedia'd you and saw some of your longtime activism and the price that you paid for it. So I guess we can start there. Talk a little bit about your experience of being under state surveillance, both in prison and under electronic surveillance outside of prison.
Okay, well, I mean, as I talk about in the book, I was a fugitive for 27 years on federal possession of explosive charges from the mid 1970s, and I spent most of that time in Southern Africa. I spent a lot of that time doing work with social justice movements, with the liberation movements in South Africa and Zimbabwe, fighting against apartheid and colonialism. In 2002, I was extradited back to the U.S. and I served 6.5 years in prison.
I'm so sorry, James. One sec. We're having a bit of a technical difficulty.
Audio's fine.
No, we can't. They can't hear him.
Oh, people are saying they can't
Oh, I'm sorry. Keep going. I apologize. This is our first day on the new system, so we're working through some of the kinks.
So I'm a guinea pig, huh?
Yes, you are exactly.
Okay, well, I hope I can pass here. So I was saying, I spent 6.5 years in prison in federal and state institutions in California. And when I came out in 2009, I was placed on an electronic monitor. The day after I got home, they put this thing on my ankle and they told me I would only be allowed out of the house from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. And that really kind of changed my idea of what freedom was going to look like after all those years of thinking about it. And I began to ask some questions about this device. Who made the rules for it? Who was making money off of it? And probably most importantly for today, where was this device going in terms of its capacity to surveil? At that time, it was tracking location, but it didn't have a lot of the bells and whistles that are on devices now. And it wasn't really connected to a broader surveillance state that it is now, which is kind of what I talk about in the book, which I refer to as E-Carceration.
And it's not just a surveillance state, and we can get into that. It's very global, which is part of what's terrifying about a lot of this technology. But I guess I also hope you could expand on how your activist work was very much a part of the liberation politics of the 70s and during that period. I mean, how did your activism and your experience with that maybe give you a different perspective on the e-carceration, electronic monitoring that you later dealt with in your life?
Okay, so my activism in the 70s in the U.S. was, I mean, I was involved in the anti-war movement, but I became involved in revolutionary violence, as we called it. I have a lot of reflections on that particular choice, but I think I learned a very different politics when I went to Southern Africa and I became part of mass movements, which involved ordinary workers, ordinary community members who, despite not having extensive formal education, who despite having English as their fourth or fifth language, were still able to conduct incredible political debates and political campaigns and begin to develop a model of participatory democracy, which involved ordinary people making decisions and building organizations and being able to pull 3 million people out on any given day on a general strike. So that kind of activity really changed my idea about what politics should look like. And that's why when I came back to the US, I looked around inside these prisons and I just saw this endless sea of bodies coming through the gate, disproportionately Black, disproportionately brown, overwhelmingly poor. And I had to try to figure out what was going on here because I hadn't really followed this phenomenon of mass incarceration. So when I came out, I had taken the decision that I wasn't going to be able to go back to South Africa because I was on parole. So I was going to do work in this community in the US around the issues of mass incarceration and try to apply some of the lessons that I'd learned about movement building and organizing in South Africa in the US, which is a very different politics than what I embodied in the 1970s.
So I guess we can start there because you do talk a lot about the racial biases in some of these programs. There is a sense sometimes that from people that the electronic monitoring, home surveillance, being outside of the prison, that's got to be applied basically equally to people when that's not, of course, the case.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, one of the remarkable things about electronic monitoring is the fact that we have almost no data on it. We do have numbers for people in prison. We can get racial breakdowns of who's in prison. But I mean, I've sent out a whole lot of Freedom of Information Act requests to states, to counties, and so forth, trying to get them to provide simple data about electronic monitoring. How many people do you have on it? What's a racial breakdown of it? how much are they paying on it if they are paying, and most importantly, how many people are being sent back to jail or to prison for minor violations, coming home late from work because the bus is delayed, having to take a child to the hospital without permission, and so forth. So we don't really have data to even know what the racial bias within electronic monitoring is. The few places we do have, I mean, they're as shocking as the racial data on mass incarceration. In Chicago, 70% of the people on electronic monitoring pretrial are Black in a county that's 25% Black. In Los Angeles, 70% of the people on electronic monitoring are Black in a jurisdiction that's 8% Black. So there's disproportionate usage of electronic monitoring, which mirrors what happens in the mass incarceration system as a whole in prisons and jails and immigration prisons.
And we can expand on that a little bit, but it might be helpful if I could ask you to define the term surveillance capitalism, which is a through line in your book. And how did the rise of surveillance capitalism coincide with the rise of global neoliberalism?
Well, I mean, surveillance capitalism as an entity really means that that data becomes the new raw material for making money. So all these technologies, many of which I detail as E-Carceration, whether it's license plate readers, street cameras, facial recognition, electronic monitoring being kind of the classic because it's clearly a process of incarceration that's more like a prison or a jail than, say, facial recognition, which people don't necessarily associate with depriving people of their liberty. But all of this is used as a way for companies to gather data on us to try to predict our behavior, and then to use those predictions either to control us if we are what I call the criminalized sector of the working class, that is poor people who are already marginalized, who are maybe been in the criminal legal system, been in the mental health system, been in substance abuse programs and so forth. All of these people are already being watched and being controlled and being blocked from access to opportunity. But then we have the broad surveillance of cell phone calls, emails, and so forth, all of which gather more and more data, which go to the cloud, which is owned by Amazon, Google, etc. And we don't know what happens to it, but I think we can guess when we get all these messages popping in onto our screens about buy this, buy that, and they're talking about something we just sent an email about 2 minutes ago.
Yeah, well, which makes your comment about how you have sent FOIA requests and tried to get some transparency on this issue especially ironic, because the breadth and the wealth of data in this area has got to be infinite.
Absolutely. But what happens is that the companies that sign the contracts for electronic monitoring aren't held to any accountability at all. So I've also sent around Freedom of Information Act requests to many jurisdictions, asking them to give me reports, evaluations, assessments of the impact of their so-called programs. And I think I've managed to get about 2 reports that were generated by a jurisdiction or by a company. It's not part of their contract. The only thing that's stipulated in the contract, how much you're going to pay for the devices and what are the kind of technical specs of these devices. But there's nothing about accountability. What are the rules going to be for the people who are on it? And how are we going to see if it's having an impact? Because I mean, I call this in the book, I refer to this as the mythology of electronic monitoring. We assume it's doing something because people say this is what it's supposed to do. But there's no data, there's no proof, as you point out, in this era where data rules, but all of a sudden we have this surveillance technology that's gathering all this data, and we can't even access it to know what it's saying about us or how it's being used against us, unless we go to apply to rent an apartment or apply for credit, and all of a sudden we get these numbers and these rejections back without explanation. So it's really a cloud of mystery.
a cloud of mystery. There we go. Very unintentional pun, potentially. But I mean, I can't help but think of someone like Steven Donziger in this case, who's been the victim of this as well. Leftist activists like yourself who've undergone this, and of course, the disproportionate Black and brown people that have been victimized by this kind of stuff, and the I should say electronic surveillance and incarceration. And the thing about it too, that the purpose of it is control, really. I mean, this is the politics of control. So there's no stated purpose for the people, but for the state, for the powerful, there is a lot of value in being able to monitor people, specifically people that are that you want to be good members of a capitalist society and good soldiers. There is of course value in that for them.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, well, I mean, one of the things, when Edward Snowden came out with his revelations and some of the other ones that basically let us know that the NSA is looking at our phone calls and looking at our email, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, a lot of people responded to that. And I think, upper middle class white people in particular saying, why are you gathering data on me? I haven't done anything. Go after those people over there. But those people over there are the same people that are impacted by mass incarceration, by mass criminalization, who get arrested for sleeping in public, or for urinating on a tree or something, and end up in this cycle of incarceration. But those are the same people that are criminalized by this surveillance technology, by these technologies of e-carceration. And the state wants to keep an eye on those people, to control those people, as you point out, wants to punish them. And this technology becomes a technology of punishment and control.
So there's, I would, and you write about this too, but there is likely a, let me put it this way. I've been very skeptical of groups like Koch Industries or the Koch brothers, and their odd push to cut back on mass incarceration. Part of that is because they want to cut costs so that taxes can be slashed even further, of course. But to me, there seems to be a push for not the abolition of the prison industrial complex, but surveillance capitalism and electronic surveillance as a replacement. Is that something that you've observed and that you have fears about?
Well, yes. I mean, that's really what triggered me to do all the research, to go around and interview people that have been on electronic monitoring, to try to counter the notion that electronic monitors represent an alternative to incarceration. In the same way that other kinds of more punitive alternatives like drug courts and mental health courts and so forth, that are really infused with this notion of punishment, what we call the punishment paradigm. So electronic monitoring, we refer to it, I mean, I work for an organization called Media Justice, and we've had a campaign called Challenging E-Carceration for several years. And part of what we try to push out on that is, number one, to change the narrative that electronic monitoring is not an alternative to incarceration, but it's an alternative form of incarceration. And secondly, that, as we've already mentioned in this discussion, that it is part of the surveillance state, or as you put it, the global surveillance state, or the global use of this technology. And that's one of the things I try to emphasize in the book, to connect the dots between what happens on people's ankle. So in the book, I'm moving from people's ankle outward for to look at the way the technology is used in immigration, the way it's used, let's say, for example, in Gaza against Palestinians, and
Right.
so forth. So I want us to understand that, it's not just an ankle shackle, and I don't call it bracelet because it's not jewelry. I mean, that's another thing that we do, is we normalize this by coming up with neutral, even positive terms for them, but that's not what they are.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to talk about Palestine and zoom out with you. But another piece that I think is a bit dystopian and scares people about this expanding surveillance state is the usage of facial recognition. And there are, of course, racial biases in that. Can you talk a little bit about your research in that area and what you found?
Well, I think, I mean, facial recognition is, there's been so many studies of it to show basically that it can't recognize black people. It can't identify. It claims to be able to, that is neutral, that is not biased, like all of these technologies do. That's part of their selling point. Is it's technology. It's not. It doesn't have bias. Humans have bias. Technology doesn't. So somehow we're supposed to accept that myth. So, but we know that in Oprah Winfrey gets identified as a man in facial recognition technology. I mean, there's all these instances where people they just can't be identified, and it's black women who kind of ironically, given the punitive nature of the system, it's black women who are most likely to be misidentified by this technology. So, but yet it just keeps spreading, and without people having accountability. Now, there have been some initiatives, like in San Francisco, they've banned the use of it by local government, and there's other initiatives in Massachusetts and so forth, because with some of these technologies, there is no positive use for them. There is, we talk about reforming and changing them. There is no positive use for facial recognition technology that I can see.
Yeah, except, I mean, then you'll have people in government or potentially companies that have quite lucrative contracts in order to provide this technology basically say, well, play out life as if it's a 24 episode. You got a terrorist with a bomb and you've got 24. I mean, that's when we need these technologies, but that's not what they're used for. It's just obviously not what they're used for, especially because that situation might happen once in a decade or a blue moon, if at all.
Right. Also, and I mean, it's not as if people who might be targeted like that aren't going to figure out that maybe they should put a plastic nose on or something and
Yeah.
and distort their face. I mean, it's just like a license plate readers is another technology like that. People, I mean, I live in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. We just had a big battle with city councils over license plate readers and trying to show that it's easy enough to misidentify a license plate number. If people are going to actually do violent crime, they're quite likely to go out and steal somebody else's license plate and put that on their car. So there's instances where people get pulled over and get rousted as if they're bank robbers or something, when all they are is the victim of a license plate switch. So these technologies are just not what they're cracked up to be. But there's no sense of making these companies accountable.
Right. Well, it's for the powerful. There's no downside for them. These companies are making a lot of money off of contracts with the government, and the government is expanding its power, which is bipartisan. That's one of the bipartisan parts of our government. And before we move on to the more global implications of this, something occurred to me, because you talked a little bit about how there's this sanitizing language of an ankle bracelet as opposed to an ankle cuff. But the whole technology as incarceration is in and of itself sanitizing, because there's, like you said before, there's a sense that, if it's a technology, then it can't have racial biases. It's just it's almost religious in the way that people approach it. There is a sense that it's omnipotent and fair, and it I feel like it does sanitize the entire experience of incarceration and of surveillance in and of itself.
Oh, yes, for sure. And I think so. The way we've tried to push back against that, because there's so little data, the data we have is the lived experience of people who have been on these monitors, who have had a loved one on the monitor, who have tried to run some kind of community-based programs with people who are on the monitor. And the lived experience of people is very different than what the salespeople or the state put forward about this technology, let alone what the sort of gurus of technology, or big tech as some people refer to them, who present technology as the savior, that technology is going to save us, and that's technology being accepted uncritically according to the mythology put forward by the companies that sell this. But I think it's really important to stress that, and I think you've been bringing this out in the way a lot of journalists and even some activists don't do, and that is, it's not the companies that drive this. The companies make profit out of it, but it takes state actors. It takes public elected officials and decision makers to take that decision to provide resources for the people that are using these technology to make these contracts. So BI, the largest electronic monitoring company in the US, has they have a monopoly on the technology that they put on electronic monitors that they put on immigrants. Well, they didn't get that. They didn't get that by themselves. They had to get that by going through the Department of Homeland Security and through Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So people in decision-making positions are taking the decision, just like they did with building prisons and jails, that this is going to be helpful to somebody, and this is going to solve the problem. And we know it hasn't solved any of the problems it was supposed to solve.
Well, it's funny you say that, because we just had someone write in and send us a super chat on the YouTube chat. Left is Best writes, ankle monitors were key to sending migrants home with family and friends instead of having them crammed in cages. Think of the unintentional consequences. Well, I mean, I don't know if that's is that them writing and saying it's positive. I mean, we're about to get to a story later in the program on how ICE, sending them home with family and friends is not how I would describe their treatment necessarily. But I do want to. It's okay. I do want to expand a little bit on the immigration point that you could. Can you talk a little bit about, if you could talk a little bit more about the experiences of migrants with this kind of electronic surveillance, and how ICE has used this kind of technology to its benefit on the border?
Sure. But just to address a minute the idea that it's better, because I mean, I've encountered this argument, it's better than jail, it's better than prison. And I think, I mean, what I always say is that I'm never going to say to someone who's sitting in a jail or prison, especially during COVID time, oh no, don't go on electronic monitor, it's really bad. Well, I know where you are is worse than that electronic monitor. But my point about that is that what we see as the best solution, or the optimal solution for an individual, isn't what we must look at when we look at the big picture. So yes, if someone wants to come out of an immigration prison and go and be with their family on electronic monitor, whatever the conditions are, maybe that's better for them as an individual. But is that what are we content with that? Are we going to say, this is good, this is the solution, let's move on to something else? And that's our point around electronic monitoring. We don't want electronic monitors. We want people to be given resources and access to opportunities, and not be tracked, not be confined to their house, but be given a chance to connect with their families in the same way that that's not happening under ICE and home and release and so forth. What are the conditions under which people are now are subject to when they're put on these monitors, or under the so-called alternatives to detention program of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement? So we're seeing right now that the Biden administration is cranking up the number of people that are going to be on surveillance. In the past, most people who are under ICE on electronic monitors were not actually under house arrest. They could pretty much move around in most instances, but their data was being tracked and used in many ways against them. But now they're going to start to introduce at least 12 hours a day of house arrest as they expand the use of electronic monitors. So, I mean, I'm predicting that that's going to get tighter, number one. But number two, organizations like Just Futures Law, Mi Gente, have done incredible research looking at the ways in which companies like Palantir, LexisNexis, and so forth have been gathering the data on electronic monitoring, and this is one of the only instances where you can actually get national data because it's under ICE, whereas with the other electronic monitors under county or state authority. So they're building all these networks of criminals and who's working and who's working without a permit, and also who's using state resources and not giving back.
Right. Right. And it's just expanding their cloud of knowledge. I want to now expand on what you talked about with Palestine, because that is just such an important point. Because yes, it's a surveillance state, but it's not bound by state borders, by national borders. These are the surveillance of Palestine makes total sense given the fact that Israel and the United States have a close relationship when it comes to sharing technology and the murderous technology that we use in the Middle East. We often share with them as well, and of course that's being used in the oppression of the Palestinian people. They're already in an open air prison. Now let's monitor them and imprison them even further.
Yes, I mean, well, I think it's interesting also that two of the biggest electronic monitoring companies in the U.S. are Israeli based. That's Atenti and Supercom. So they're, I mean, as you pointed out, they're really at the cutting edge of the development of a lot of this surveillance technology. And in fact, the Palestinians are, really experimental subjects for a lot of this technology. And what I was really trying to point out in that chapter is the fact that people are beginning to talk about open air prisons in the United States, and the fact that a lot of, say, Black communities become almost like an open air prison with the technologies that are used with stingrays and surveillance cameras and facial recognitions and license plate readers and extensive police occupation. And I mean, so I wanted people to connect the dots between what happens in those communities and what's happening in a place like Palestine, but also to realize that in Palestine there's a whole other dimension to this, and that is that we have actual physical walls that keep them in there, physical barriers, and B, that the population is subject to military attack and bombing by the Israeli Defense Force, which isn't exactly what's happening in the U.S. But I think we just need to be aware that these things take different shape in different places, but there's still connections between the technology that's used and, most of all, the mentality of people that build systems, that build these punitive systems, which target certain populations.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, we talk about that. We've talked about this a bit on the show before. There is a lot of shadiness and lack of clarity on the extent of the United States operations in Africa, where we have a larger presence than is widely publicized. And my guess is there is, I'm sure, a lot of testing being done there in terms of surveillance technology. But now I walk myself back a little bit there too, because a lot of it's just happening here in the United States on poorer populations as well.
But I think there's an important international connection there, that the raw materials, the minerals that are used for a lot of this surveillance technology are being mined in Africa by children, in some cases, by super exploited labor. So I mean, I think that's another way of connecting the dots of, even in our cell phones, we have various minerals and so forth that are coming from places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So we rely on exploiting that labor in order to be able to surveil countries and continents.
Yes. Well, I mean, your book is an incredible read. I would encourage everybody to check it out. James Kilgore, author of Understanding E-Carceration, Electronic Monitoring, the Surveillance State, and the Future of Mass Incarceration. Thank you so much for being here with us and bearing with us on our first day with our new streaming situation. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Emma. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate your work.
Absolutely. And you too as well. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, come back, wrap up the rest of the show. We are back. We are back. So yeah, we don't usually read super chats, but Matt, we're trying to incorporate that a little bit more. I think Matt was sending them to me, so I can't read that stuff.
Yeah, and I actually misread Left is Best as agreeing with the guest, but I will say it was
Great
a good
answer.
question to pose to that, because I think that is that's the pitch, right?
Right. I mean, and alternatives are. It's just that's a more. He's coming from a more radical perspective than that.
Well, and a systemic one, right? Like
yes.
on an individual level, like I'm sure there are cases like that, but what does a technology like this do allow like the security state to expand to? So all sorts of different things are monitored and that sort of stuff. Like
right.
I think it is very worrisome. And I like his point about there's certain technologies we need to look at and be like, there's no point to this, other than points we don't agree with, and we should put a kibosh to this. That's not something people like to do in modern times, because you get accused of being a Luddite. But Ludditism is good, actually.
But all right, let's before we head into the fun half, let's talk about this really disturbing story. So Sam Biddle of The Intercept wrote a story that I'd encourage everybody to check out. It's about Amazon, but it's not really about Amazon. It's really about our immigration privatization and what the United States actually does to human beings. So there's our generation does not fall for like the fanfic, Alexander Hamilton or whatever, but there are a lot of still people who believe the US is the greatest country on earth and is above these kinds of tactics.
That the Constitution is there to protect us and not to a conspiracy against people who have to work for a living or are owned by people, right? To keep them down.
Yeah, that is the religion of the United States in many ways, but we've got multiple ones. Here, this kind of story should shake that belief at least a little bit. Amazon co-owns deportation airline implicated in alleged torture of immigrants. So this piece that Bradley's putting up here, it's disturbing. Just a bit of a warning in terms of what's described by what is done by Omni Air International, which is responsible for a lot of the deportation efforts by the United States government. Amazon quietly became a partial owner of Air Transport Services Group Incorporated, a power player in the air cargo industry that has helped the United States forcibly deport thousands of migrants and, its passengers allege, at times subjected them to horrific abuse en route. On March 9th, 2021, Amazon purchased 19.5% of ATSG for $131 million and currently reserves options that would let it expand that stake to 40%. Among ATSG's various aviation subsidiaries is Omni Air International, a passenger charter firm that moves humans on behalf of the federal government. Its two most prominent federal customers are the DoD, which uses the firm for troop transports, and the Department of Homeland Security, which has paid the company reportedly exorbitant fees over the years in order to execute so-called special high-risk charter flights for its ICE Air deportation machine. Immigration and Customs Enforcement deals with Omni through an intermediary, Classic Air Charter Incorporated, a flight logistics firm whose parent company previously helped transport CIA prisoners to black sites to be tortured. Just a sense of what we're dealing with here. And so again, this is less about Amazon, and like honestly, I would imagine that Biddle and The Intercept wanted to put Amazon in the headline because one, yes, they are culpable, but two, it's a little bit more clicky. But really, this is a systemic conversation about the privatization of the worst parts of our government because it creates less oversight and it gets people rich in the process. The deportation flight abuse crisis is attributed directly to the opacity of firms like Omni. And this is a quote from a 2019 U of Washington human rights study. Over the past decades, the institutional infrastructure behind these flights has shifted from a government operation run by the U.S. Marshal Service on government planes to a sprawling semi-secret network of flights on privately owned aircraft. One of the more infamous examples is a notoriously botched 2017 removal flight to Somalia, which the center believes was operated by Omni, on which deportees alleged physical beatings, the use of straitjackets, verbal abuse and threats, and the denial of access to restrooms, which forced passengers to soil themselves in their seats. Even without specific allegations of abuse, the flights come with inherent brutality for deportees. So outside of these reported, making them soil their pants on an international flight, which is many, many hours to Africa, that constitutes abuse. But even the baseline usage of these flights is abusive. The flights come with an inherent brutality for deportees who remain bound and shackled for the entirety of an international flight, at times upward of 30 hours or more with stopovers. Nearly 100 formal allegations of abuse and mistreatment aboard ICE air flights were filed to the Department of Homeland Security's Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties between 2007 and 2018, including a 2012 incident in which an ICE detainee miscarried her triplets aboard a removal flight to El Salvador. They place them in what is called a wrap, which is essentially a straitjacket, but worse. The wrap incapacitates individuals by binding their legs together and their arms behind their back in a semi-seated position using a mummy-like set of harnesses, locks, and chains. This is one of the complaints filed to the Department of Homeland Security's Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties by a coalition of immigrant advocacy groups and the Texas A&M University School of Law. It details the harrowing experience of 3 migrants deported by Omni Air, alleging that ICE is using the wrap in a manner that constitutes torture or cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment in violation of the Convention Against Torture. And this is a quote from one of the men. One man recounted that after he was being thrown to the ground and shot with rubber bullets, he was placed in the wrap and loaded onto an Omni flight where his body remained locked in at a 40-degree angle for about 9 hours. It was so painful, he said. The position was very stressful on my body. My muscles were shot with pain the entire bus ride and flight back to Cameroon. And a lot of this is taken from a report by Sarah Towley, who put a lot of this together and interviewed these people.
Jesus.
So I wanted to talk about that, one, because it was germane to the interview that we just did, but two, because this is how our government gets away with, and in fact executes with, in a cloak and dagger way, the worst of U.S. empire. They privatize it. Companies like Amazon make money off of it. And then shadier companies that are more behind the scenes that do deals with companies like Amazon make money off of it. Everybody gets rich off human suffering. And the United States, what they get out of it, yeah, there's a bit of plausible deniability, even though they know exactly what they're doing when they outsource this to companies like this.
Yeah, and then let's return to lecturing other countries about human rights.
Yeah. Right. Where that boycott of the Olympics, just someone ask Joe Biden about this story, and then talk about again, not an excuse about cultural genocide of the Uyghurs, but the hypocrisy in the United States and the idea that we use our platform to wag our fingers as we do things like this. Give me a break.
Yeah, exactly. I think like the idea that I think it shouldn't be that controversial that you keep an eye on the body politic you're a member of most. And I'm sorry, like the way that it acts in these sorts of ways, and like also in Afghanistan, like just killing hundreds of thousands of people. I'm not like going to give it my warrant in, being a defender of human rights, because I think it's appalling what it's actively doing, and it has been doing my entire lifetime, all of our entire lifetimes, our parents' entire lifetimes before that.
Well, that is that. That is the first hour of our program. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We are going to head into the fun half shortly, but first, Left Reckoning was last night.
Oh yeah, it was. We had a very fun show with Pascal and Jason from This Is Revolution. We talked about a whole lot. I mean, man, where to start? Jason has a big thing on Bill Cosby, so we talked a little bit about that in media and the types of message that different sorts of audiences would take from the Cosby Show growing up, and how they're all pretty much bad.
Did you like the Cosby Show? Because I did.
So I sort of watched it, but I'll be honest, like I never really I got into more like Jamie Foxx and Martin.
Yeah.
Like Cosby Show was like in reruns by the time I was sort of old enough to like watch TV, and
Nick at Night. That was like where I got
right.
yeah.
Yeah. And like I but like I didn't watch it enough to like know the characters' names and stuff like that. But yeah, we talked a little bit about that and how you know comparatively young me and David are. And then we had a fun post game where we talk about privatizing the moon to save poverty, and how a neoliberal think tank has had that bright idea. I don't know why. It's just a little media lesson. Like, if a neoliberal think tank says we should privatize the moon, that's not a news story. But if they say we should privatize the moon to save poverty, the Independent has to write it up and be like, oh, this think tank thinks we have to do it. Like,
right.
anyways, so check that out, patreon.com/leftreckoning. We had a really fun show last night. Oh, we have both these.
We have them there.
So we'll
Wait.
loading them into the show on the fly. We're gonna have to take a break, and then we'll get right to their plugs. I apologize. I'll include them in the show, but getting them into OBS might take a little bit. So we're gonna take a little break, and then we'll
figuring it out.
Yeah.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy.
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males.
Psych. Fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
figure it out.
All right, folks, we are back. We'll be a little bit choppy. It looks like we're stressing the inputs a little bit, but we're going to try the post game like this. So hello, Binder and Brandon. If you guys wanted to tell us what's going on your shows while we get this sorted out.
Yeah.
Sure. We'll have a new episode out tonight. So I'll go first since I always have the least information to give. We'll have a new episode out tonight. So look forward to that.
All right.
Sounds good. And tonight, youtube.com/Matt Binder live at 9 p.m. Eastern time will be a new episode of Scam Economy, looking at the crypto Super Bowl ads and what that was all about. And then I'll go live with the post show and take calls and talk about other stories. Tune in tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern time, youtube.com/Matt Binder, and also scameconomy.com.
Amazing. All right, let's take a call really quick. We can maybe get this smoothed out a little bit, talk to some people. I will.
What do people see right now?
No, they see us. Calling
They
from
see us clear. It's just a little bit choppy, that video.
Yeah, calling from a 571. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, is this me?
That's you.
Hey, this is Amber from Northern Virginia.
Amber from Northern Virginia. What you calling about?
So I wanted to talk a bit about what's happening here in Virginia during the General Assembly, specifically around masks. I think the Washington Post has been talking about it, but Glenn Youngkin just signed into law yesterday a bill that started out as a anti-virtual learning bill, but then saw an amendment in the state Senate by a Democrat to add a mask mandate ban, basically saying that parents have the ultimate authority at the local and state level of whether their kids have to wear masks. It's worded in the bill that there is no one at local or state, I'm paraphrasing, but yeah, so now parents can say, my kid doesn't have to wear a mask, and school districts across the entire Commonwealth can't do anything about it. And that's because we have some conservative Democrats in the Senate who decided, yeah, we want to be done with it. In addition, I don't know how they did this, but Glenn Youngkin added a emergency clause, because obviously masks on children is an emergency.
Right, obviously.
Obviously. I mean, like masks, I mean, like, you know, the worst thing to happen to schools.
It's child abuse.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we need kids to have guns in schools, obviously, but masks, that's the dangerous part.
Right.
But yeah, so this went into effect, it's effective yesterday with the emergency clause. Normally these bills don't go into effect until July 1st, but we need to get this apparently passed immediately. And they did a whole signing on the steps of the Capitol building. And then, so all school districts in Virginia have to comply by March 1st, or probably some kind of consequences like funding. So we don't have 4 months. We have less than a week.
Jesus. Man, so,
Yep.
I mean, do you think that this has teeth? Like, what's been the response by some people in your, some people you know in your state?
Well, I'm in Fairfax County. I grew up in Loudoun, and Loudoun County immediately said, okay, we're going to follow this as of February 22nd. So Loudoun County, which is a fairly blue, more recently, but a fairly blue county, they said, okay, Loudoun County Public Schools, we're going to follow this, and masks are now optional. And then a judge put in an injunction that says, no, masks are now optional tomorrow. And so as of today in Loudoun County, masks are optional, just like that. So Fairfax, they weren't part of the 7 school districts that were suing Youngkin about this. We have no idea what's going to happen to the lawsuit now, because now it's a law of the land. And this isn't a temporary thing. In the House, Democrats tried to get an amendment approved that said that this sunsets July 1st, 2023, unless the General Assembly next year passes something. And the Republican majority in the House said, No. This is there's no sunset. This is just the law of Virginia until another law comes in that makes this obsolete. So if for some reason this stays on the books and like sometime later another pandemic happens or another health crisis, there's nothing that schools can do about it to make kids wear masks.
It's absolute insanity, especially given the poll numbers that we saw the other day and we've been highlighting on the show. Parents want masks, but hey, apparently it's
the majority.
It's the reverse. The government wants to tell you how to raise how your kids are going to be in school, and that's what conservatives keep saying is what Democrats want. But Amber, I appreciate the call. Thank you for the update from Virginia.
Very welcome. Happy to be on the show.
Awesome. Bye.
It's so wild to me how the whole masks in schools thing is such an important issue. Like one issue voters here on masks in schools and the drama that ensues, like the over dramatic reactions they have to the fact that if a child is wearing a little face covering over their mouth and nose for just literally a few hours, then it amounts to you are abusing your child. It is amazing to me.
Well, they can't see you.
You know what it is?
Smile.
The abuse is that their parents are what their parents are telling their kids. The society is contradicting it. That's again, like that's what these parents are reacting so strongly against. Is I'm telling them one thing that these masks are BS or whatever, and society's like actually no, these masks save lives on the margins, and
that's the CRT thing too.
Exactly, and that's child abuse to those parents.
I think the masks are also
No, go ahead, Brandon.
But I was going to say, I think the masks are also part of this sort of like push to return to normal in a way that is less about the safety of returning to normal and more about how people feel about where we are in terms of the pandemic. Which, if kids need to wear masks in school to go, that's, so that people don't spread the virus. That's one thing that I think we can, if you want things society to function. But what people really want is for it to be out of sight, out of mind. And that's why we can't have kids wearing masks, but we also can't have schools closing because all the teachers are sick. So it just has to be some sort of like middle ground that is impractical and impossible. Of like, well, teachers, I guess they work sick. Kids, since they don't have the propensity to die in such huge numbers of COVID, can just be a constant cycle of having COVID and not having COVID. But it's all just like a very, I think it's telling where we are as a country. The only way we know how to deal with problems is to just like pretend they don't exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, magical thinking is definitely inside of the brains of many people in this country. That's like some of the, I don't know. I don't want to go too hard about religion, but there's no, it's not a shock to me that there's an overlap in some of the evangelical corners of our country and the same people who believe that pretending the pandemic's going to go away is going to make it go away.
I mean, I think there's a secondary danger to letting Republicans convince you that you should let, Republicans and pundits who are like loosely aligned with, I guess, the system, let you convince the pandemic is something you should pretend has gone away. Because then that's one of those things that we'll hear about in like 6 months during the midterms when Republicans across the board are like, more people have died under Biden than under Trump. That means you vote for us. And like, it's a trick to get you to take a impractically, or rather impossible to defend position, which is that a lot of Americans dying every day of our healthcare infrastructure being terrible is acceptable as long as we keep the Republicans out of office.
Right. All right, let's read some IMs. J-Man Raps, barely surviving in the land of commune fascism, otherwise known as Canada. Shout out to Lee Carter. Anyways, a week without the NBA. That's the real tyranny, Emma. I want the audience to understand that the true NBA fans in this studio are Matt and Bradley.
What was the question?
Yeah, sorry, I missed it. Also, your mic sound, Bradley.
They said that your mic, you have to press on that.
Yeah, what was the question?
Whoa, out of the box.
Hello.
That's the other thing.
Wow, Bradley on an actual professional
It's
mic.
me.
Now that we're upgraded to the new tech, Bradley no longer has to be put in that ICE detention chokehold that we normally put him in when he has to work.
I was in the Amazon prison.
What was the basketball question?
Oh, the basketball question. Oh, you don't want me to keep going on that tangent? They just said a week without the NBA. That's the real tyranny, Emma. says J Man Raps. I mean, that I didn't realize they have a week off now.
Yeah. Well, is this because of the All-Star break?
Yeah, right. It's the All-Star breaks already.
We'll see. I'm excited about the Nets. I'm excited about the Sixers. I'm excited about a lot of stuff in basketball right now.
Yeah, I was at the Knicks game last night.
Oh wow.
It's really demoralizing.
Who did they play?
Yeah, they played the Nets. Knicks Nets.
The Nets.
Watch highlights, Matt.
The Nets without KD or Kyrie. So Seth Curry and Drummond beat you guys? Yeah. Nice.
We were up 28 at the half.
At least hopefully now Tibbs gets fired. Mopping up. It's insane to me that there's a Canadian high-ranking official who's the granddaughter of a Nazi collaborator helping Ukrainian neo-Nazi paramilitaries in their propaganda efforts with the Ukrainian diaspora. But, China.
They're I believe they get into that either in Chapo or that TrueAnon with Mark Ames.
Oh, really? I want to listen to that now. Custodial artist. Continuing off my last comment, us Americans focusing on how other countries run and do things while ignoring the same, if not works acts at home, reeks of the same projection we see now. Left is best. You guys want to do a clip or two?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. Here, let me see. Let's do Rubin.
I was about to say.
Right? Come on.
My favorite.
He is very fun to talk about because Dave Rubin, I don't know where he's been. I know he said that he was in the lab with a pen and a pad trying to come up with a way to get back at Twitter for being banned for 48 hours for COVID misinformation. Was that what it was? So he's just stewing on his evil plan, or his righteous plan, as he would put it.
His righteous plan to offer Joe Rogan a whole bunch of money to come to his dumb social media site.
Right, exactly. Is local still yodeling? Still yodeling?
It's still trying to sign checks that people don't want to accept.
Right. So I don't know how long it takes for him to come up with ideas. My guess is that his brain works at a different pace than other people in his profession. So he is now only just getting to the Holocaust comparisons when it comes to vaccinated people. It's just like, Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham, they were doing this 2 or 3 months ago. Dave's brain only caught up recently. Here he is with his take on the Canadian trucker convoy.
I just said to my guys as we were playing this, it's truly incredible watching these people flip the story and how they reverse everything they say about one thing when it's their guys doing it versus how they say it when it's the other guys doing it. First off, I just want to say something very, very clearly here. I lost family members on both sides of the Holocaust, okay? I grew up around Holocaust survivors. I am well versed in what the Holocaust was and what the demonization of people is. Although the guy who was interviewed there, and by the way, great cherry picking on that Daily Show, and then they cherry pick that on the Daily Show, and then of course they throw that to CNN because they're all in on it together. I believe they're both owned by Viacom. It's just one big circle jerk in essence.
All right.
Just regardless of what the guy said, whether you think he said it in a butchered way or he shouldn't say it or something like that, the way something like the Holocaust starts is you otherize people, right? You keep otherizing them. You say, oh, you can't be part of the economy. You can't own a store. You can't do this. We're going to demonize you. You're diseased. So it is not a giant leap, okay? It really is not, and I don't care how much hate I get for this. It is not a giant leap after 2 years of demonizing certain people who wanted choice, medical choice, and choice used to be thought of as a good thing, to compare them to the Jews before the Holocaust. It's not a perfectly symmetrical situation, right? There aren't gas chambers in Canada yet. Okay, so it's not perfect, but it is not deeply wrong. And
So that's not the Holocaust doesn't happen just because we say that a group of people are not in the right, which is exactly what's happening here. You are not in the right if you are not getting vaccinated. That's just not the right thing to do. You're not in the right, and you don't get to participate in certain elements of society if you pose a risk to others. how the Holocaust happened is because of right-wing fascism. And that's what right-wingers can't say. That's how it happened. But like MLK, like these other massive historical events that prove that the right is incapable of actually doing something good for society and are historically proven to be bad, they have to obscure that. That's what that's all about.
Absolutely. And I just want to, right-wing fascism in Europe, especially in Nazi Germany, that was largely inspired, some of their worst atrocities by, the actions of Americans. The actions of Americans in the way they treat Native Americans, the actions of Americans when the way they treat, the way they treated slaves, the actions of Germany prior to the Holocaust in their colonies in Africa. This is like, this is one of those things that I think makes it so hard to take it seriously when people pretend like we can have these sort of cross alliances in the media between like the left and the right. Because, little like people who are more encouraged to have those alliances due to like the monetary incentives that they promise, pretend like these comparisons are less terrible, less like lazy comparisons about like, oh, we want people to have freedom, we don't want people to be like lose their freedom to access good just because of like this little small thing. It's like, well, we know how all of these people, we know how Dave Rubin feels about the actual precursors to the Holocaust that still exist in our society. We know how he feels about the the prison industrial complex. We know how he feels about the military industrial complex. We know how he mostly feels about domestic spying and all these other things. The idea that like it's so like rather that he wants it to be encouraging and other right wingers want it to be so encouraging and confusing that they think that people who they're aligned with are receiving special treatment, should receive special treatment, or are rather not receiving special treatment by the government when it cracks down on protests. But we as the left should expect, should allow for that special treatment. It's not surprising at all to me. It's just, Dave Rubin's a bigot. Dave Rubin thinks that, people aligned with his personal ideology deserve better treatment, special treatment than people who he views as inherently lesser than him, either because he, thinks that having those views makes him money, or because he truly believes in his heart is irrelevant to me. But there's just like this wave of media, or rather this wave of hope people want to see in right-wing media, people like Dave Rubin, that is entirely based on the fact that they're just basically bigots, that they think that they deserve special treatment from the government, where my position is that, yeah, protesting should be legal. It's currently not very legal. We should do something about that. Not, not on an individual case by case basis, but entirely overhaul the system. Well, Dave Rubin wants you to just focus on that one sliver of the protests he like thinks are right, and then sort of check you like, oh, I thought you liked protests. It's like, yeah, I do. I do like protests. You don't.
The problem is how like these folks obscure the actual, like, I'd call it fascism that exists in our country every day. You look at like what's causing the trucker shortage. It's not like these vaccine mandates. This is from Wells Fargo conference call, and the reason being is very simple, and some of you know this, and this may be new. It is really about drug testing. We've legalized marijuana in some states, but obviously not all, but some. And you have, as a trucker, you have a federal mandate for drug testing, right? Like that sort of thing. You didn't hear the Nazi comparisons by those folks when it comes to the drug war, even though that led America to be the #1 cager of human beings in the entire fucking planet, right? And yeah, like that. It's just like that obscurantism, and like that freedom is to continue commerce during a pandemic is. I mean, let's just say that has a dark history in America. Like, I'm just thinking of the steamship that went up the Missouri River called the Yellowstone that carried smallpox up to the Mandan and Hidatsa Indians and wiped out like 75 to 90% of those folks in like the 1830s. So like, okay, that's a type of commercial freedom that you have to just go infect people. And the idea that like we're calling folks that decide that they want to carry a higher risk of infecting people with the virus as disease, like, no, you are voluntarily taking a choice. This isn't a race-based argument like the ones Hitler was making, which, as Brandon pointed out, were inspired here.
Yeah, well, no one likes to talk about how Hitler stole from the United States, but that's a separate conversation too. I mean, I feel like another way that right-wingers like Dave Rubin and Tucker Carlson could support the everyday trucker and the working man, which they really do try to use the cachet of like the mythology of that profession in order to create a shorthand to make it seem like they're protecting workers. because again, for right wingers, workers are only if you have a hard hat on, or you're a trucker, or if you are white and male and you have grease smeared on your face. But they just are quite silent about the efforts of truckers in, say, California right now to unionize. And who are trying to make clear that their working conditions and their wages are abysmal. And there is actually very little media coverage about that in general. I know Alex Press wrote about it in Jacobin, but I haven't seen much about it. And that's the real outrage, is the fact that that despite the essential nature of trucking in this country in order to maintain our supply chains, which is what the powerful people in our government and the capitalists really want to maintain, they're willing to pay starvation wages for their truckers and give them very little protections, and contract them out, as opposed to I don't know, actually paying them.
This conversation that should the left be engaging, it's like, what are they doing? What are they throwing to the left? They're calling Justin Trudeau a communist, right? It's not like they're not even like aiming for any sort of like decommodification, or like their liberty is like, I mean, people got mad at like the Washington Post for pointing out like the historic relationship between, say, freedom and slavery, but like their liberty is one that says, fuck you, I'm going to get mine. And like, I'm sorry, I don't see any room for the left of that. And like, maybe if they're like, oh, we got to get Americans Medicare for all, or I don't know what are people so impressed by? Their demand is to take the pandemic less seriously. Like that's not something you can sign on with.
I have a little bit of a different take than you guys. I personally am just happy to finally hear from a liberal supporting those blue collar truckers.
I don't know. I feel like for the the right wing content creator, like the working class is just another like noble savage archetype. It's the newest version of that. It's
That's
just like
such a good point.
It's like this group of this homogenous group of quote unquote workers who are like, in their minds, like they're mud farmers. They live in like Alabama, like shoveling coal into another coal pile and like face covered in soot. And like, yeah, they don't want anything better than they have, and you shouldn't like try to encourage them. They just want to, they just want to be allowed to keep being like, I guess, racist or something. And that's just like, the petty bigotry of low expectations. It's not as though they are not bigoted against the working class or even against truckers. They just view them in this particular instance as a very useful vehicle to like draw an, for themselves to ventriloquize a lot of their positions, which is that, oh yeah, we want the government to take the pandemic less seriously, either because we have a personal ideological position about the government taking anything seriously, or just because we want to feel like everything's going back to normal. And I generally think that it's great to do protests. It's great to make the government come out and get you afterwards. But ultimately, that's just what happens in these countries. Like that's just the way the government treats protesters. They've treated the convoy protesters way better than protesters are treated in, indigenous protesters are treated in Canada, indigenous protesters are treated in America. It's not about what's good for the goose being good for the gander. It's just that this is not a problem that can be solved by simply believing in like trickle down like social justice. That like if we just take care of the people who are last affected by this problem, like the white working class truckers who are being funded by like various dark money organizations, then it's going to make things worse for people who are already overburdened by this exact system that they're trying to just shine a spotlight on now.
Not only just the treatment of like, you brought up, indigenous protests in Canada and even here in the US, not even just like the treatment of how, they're quashed, but even whether or not we hear about those protests being quashed. Like these trucker convoys have received such a disproportionate amount of media coverage compared to literally any other protest. Like a leftist protest literally would get little to no coverage unless they went out of their way to literally like demand it and beg for it and go to like a media outlet and specifically say, here we are. And these guys are literally just getting it because of who they appear to represent.
Yeah, and which side of the politics they benefit, which benefits.
It's also even how we're talking about it. Like here we like obviously we've made the addendums of who actually represents these truckers, but you see all these other outlets though, the truckers, the trucker convoy, the freedom convoy. It's like, if you look into the demographics of who these people are, they're mostly not truckers. I mean, would we call any other protest that just declares itself a certain identity to call them by that name?
The trucker riot.
Right.
No, I mean, we do the exact opposite. If Black Lives Matter is protesting because of the, undisclosed number of police shootings that occur in this country, and like one person as part of that protest yells at someone at like a bakery or something, then in the entirety of Black Lives Matters is culpable for that in the mind of like the right-wing media, and then the left, some of the center-left media has to take, the side that you're right, we can condemn the entire protest based on this one person because, a protest is not is the responsibility of whoever plans it. And it's just an asymmetric expectation of like proof. The left is expected to support every protest as, based on like the Constitution, I guess, of Canada. I don't really know what Canada allows in terms of protesting because I'm not Canadian. But, we're supposed to protect everyone's right to protest and free speech, even if it's largely to the detriment of the very things that, the fundamental system that they're trying to, I guess, say ensures that free speech, because a lot of this is just like a cyclical snake eating its own tail thing, where like you're asking for the government to be weakened so that it's less able to take care of pandemics. But a lot of these people who are saying that the truckers are being treated so badly are the same ones who want to give the police more money. The same ones who are constantly advocating for like the expansion of the police state, constantly advocating for the expansion of like, authoritarianism in the government, as long as it's being disguised that's only going to affect, Black people. And like he said, honestly, a lot of what Dave Rubin said is not incorrect. It's just his position is that it's something that can be tackled simply by preventing like white people from having to be, suffer the consequences that are already being suffered by everybody else, or rather rich white people in their avatars. But like that's just a function of capitalism. Eventually it starts eating like the bottom level. Like it's just not it's a zero-sum game.
All right, let's read some IMs. The
I will
emo
say that
drag.
I don't think Dave Rubin's right about the gas chambers coming to Canada. I just want to add that.
Yeah,
it's going to be maple
I think
syrup
that was
chambers.
clear. I think that was clear.
They're gonna drown the truckers in like a big vat of maple syrup like they did witches back in the Salem days.
At least they'll be tasty. Although I don't know, that amount of maple syrup might be a bit of sensory overload.
They'll come out frozen in carbonite like Han Solo in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
You'll look like the crystallized mosquito from Jurassic Park.
Just thinking about washing my hair after being in a vat of maple syrup.
I didn't know that they used to do that to witches with the maple syrup. That's. I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense, but that's
no,
brutal.
he's messing around.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I was substituting water for maple syrup or vice versa.
Okay. I mean, it'd be a lot easier to float, I think, in maple syrup.
Right.
Yeah, it's dense.
Marxist or big truck nuts. Okay, the bigger truck. All right. Marxist professor.
That's an actual thing.
Has the correct analysis of the Canadian trucker convoy. I highly recommend your listeners watch his latest video on it. Okay, I don't know what his take is.
No, he's not been very. I don't know what about his latest video, but he's been on Jimmy Dore, basically, sort of giving in to Jimmy's arguments that this is a workers' movement, and yeah, I don't. He's been off on this.
He had a talk with Owen Higgins that I want to visit. I'm not sure if he's like come a little bit down from the stuff with Dore, but
again, I don't know what his current position is, or if he just let Dore steamroll over him on his own on Dore's show. But
yeah, I like
the
Richard
last
Wolff.
thing I saw, he did not have a good take on this.
Yeah. I like Richard Wolff. I think his work is valuable, but on this, I would verify that first.
Cosmo Possum writes in, speaking of coal miners in Alabama, Southern DSA chapters have been running a fundraiser for the UMWA folks on strike in Brookwood, and Senator Sanders had Cecil Roberts, UWMA president, and Braxton Wright, UMWA. Gosh, I'm doing the inverse. I mean, it's the same letter upside down. Local 2368 speak to the Senate Budget Committee this morning. Well, I'll make a note, and hopefully we can cover that a little bit tomorrow. Tojo's bald head. Anti-Semitism in Europe existed long before Anglos were in the New World. I don't know what your point is.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that's in relation to. Pilfered
Paste. Rubin using IPOL to have a right to use the Holocaust comparison, but not the brains to make it coherent. The last true liberal, folks. React Lord. So you guys going to ignore reacting to Ilhan Omar totally supporting a trucker protest funder, or going to talk about it later?
Oh, I saw that. I mean, I don't think she was supporting a funder. I think her point, I mean, in the overarching, for people who don't know, there was a report about this in Canadian media about this woman who runs like this bakery or some small business, and she donated $250 to the truckers. And the right-wing media totally went after this report and whoever wrote it, and the outlet that published it, basically saying they were, causing harassment towards her. And Ilhan Omar came out and said she agreed with that take. But the thing is, everyone either, I'm going to assume the right-wingers read the report purposefully in a way to distort it, and that Ilhan Omar unfortunately took that sort of framing of it. But they weren't the ones who doxed her. The report didn't dox her. In fact, the report was about how people who downloaded the hacked material from that Give Send Go right-wing GoFundMe website, basically the trucker convoy fundraiser got hacked, and they released all the people who donated, their emails, names, et cetera, and how much they donated. People had found that themselves, saw her name on the list, and went after her. And the report was basically just about the harassment she was receiving as someone who just gave $250 and was a small business owner, and how she had to close down her store for a day or whatever. And they actually talked to her, like she reached out to them to tell them her story. They weren't the ones involved with the doxing of her or the stoking harassment or being like, look at this woman who gave $250. They were reporting on the harassment she was already receiving. So the right, maliciously sort of distorted that story to go after the media and journalists. And unfortunately, it seems like Ilhan Omar sort of fell for that framing.
All right. Well, I mean, these are not.
I'm looking at it. I don't care.
Yeah,
I think Ilhan's concern there is, I think, fair enough, and she misread the story, whatever. But like, whatever.
Right.
The answer to the Emma, like, I wish I had ignored it.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Binder, for having the details on it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's just like this.
It's interesting how that media disinformation flows down that way, and it ended up in front of a sitting congresswoman who has, I believe, also the right take on the overarching situation of, is some random $200 donation to this worth it? Is she the same as some like named figure, or even someone who isn't known giving literally tens of thousands of dollars, as we know some people have done? And I would argue, yeah, I don't think it is. But unfortunately, in this case, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just I imagine caring about that.
Well, I've canceled Ilhan Omar.
Yeah, right.
This is the first I'm hearing about this. I don't know what you're talking about, really.
I'm sure it's so rebel cause. Emma, it was distasteful of you to joke about your producer being in an ICE detention center or Amazon detention center. Not sure what's funny about that. It came across very crass. Okay, I'm sorry. I understand. I just said, I didn't say he was in ICE detention center. I said we were using the mummy bind. But
no, I said it. Sorry.
It was a miss. Look, we got to fill 3 hours here.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, I'm not even ready to concede it was a miss. No, I'm joking. I understand what you're saying. There's a lot of negative comments about us today.
Let's have them. Let's do it.
I mean, that was like a few of them. The also saying that Seder Day, stop calling it a protest. The trucker convoy is a blockade, and that is a form of direct action. It's not speech. It's an exercise of power.
Sure.
Feminine Neem. Thank you, Emma, for interviewing Schuler. She is a legend. One thing, though, the MR listener community is pathetically anti-trans and a pure sausage fest. I saw the live chat hate her and then tons of dislikes. I hope in 10 years this changes. Are they anti? I mean,
that's not my experience, but
that's not my experience either.
Chat, if you, particularly if you're saying like hating on somebody in an anti-trans way, I would have thought our mods would have nipped that in the bud, but whatever.
I don't see the chat really. I mean, I'll check on the stream just to make sure it's doing, so I don't have a good sense of it. But my sense is, I don't know. I received some really positive messages after we interviewed in our turf discussion recently.
I'll
So
say
I
YouTube audience is not very well representative of someone's overall audience, especially on a live stream.
right, right.
Personally, I like on my when I do my shows on Thursday night and I take Skype calls, like half the callers who call into my show are trans, and so I mean I know there's a huge supportive audience for sure of trans people within like the MR universe.
Right. Yeah. It's anyway. Against Trudeau, Emma Brandon, I don't think most genuine leftists are actually for trucker protests. They are against draconian reaction of Trudeau, which we have called out on the show. The emergency powers, freezing of bank accounts, and expanding definition of terrorists. What's your take on his reaction? The truckers are dumb, agreed. We, as Sam mentioned this earlier, 100% think it's government overreach and ridiculous and scary that he has that power. He should not have been allowed to do that.
Right.
And I don't like, I mean, I that's why, I've stopped calling even extreme right-wingers domestic terrorists, because the use of terrorists is often a way to expand government power and surveillance to a degree that would otherwise not be acceptable if that label was not used.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that assessment. My main point of contention is that some people will use like people like Dave Rubin or people like Tucker Carlson or any other like consistently right-wing demagogue content creator supporting this protest or this blockade. I don't really define the need to make that kind of distinction as like an example of how they're reachable. Like they care about protesting in this instance, and so therefore like they're reachable even if it's as a way to point out their hypocrisy. But for me, it's like they're not hypocrites, they're just bigots. They think they deserve better, treatment than everybody else. And it's impossible to break bread with people on issues around civil liberties who ultimately just believe that they should be for themselves. And that's never going to lead to like I said, trickle down social justice. Like getting like Dave Rubin to agree that the Holocaust was bad, or that's Candace Owens to agree that slavery was bad, as a vehicle to criticize the way like I guess bank funded truckers blockading the border of Canada and US is doesn't fill me with any sense of like hope that the right wing might be reached, because like I know that they think they deserve better treatment. I know that they say things like that all the time, and so like I think it's more of a question of how do we as the left tackle the underlying issues that cause like all protests to be viewed as criminal, all protests to be viewed as some level of illegal, especially when we see that in instances like this, there's such a huge discrepancy with the way that, these protesters are treated by the police industrial complex, the military industrial complex, the state. And, from my perspective, there's just no reason to even listen to like Tucker Carlson or like any right-wing content creators point about this issue.
Sorry, Brandon. I just wanted to say, like, I thought there was the problem was like there were leftists that were with them before the whole like bank draconianism from a few days ago, right? Like
leftists, though.
Yeah, but leftists. I've seen plenty of people think that like we should be throwing in with these guys, and I'm sorry. Like, I think it's like it's right populism, or there's an article, and maybe we should talk about this tomorrow. Or there's from the Brownstone Institute, spiritual successor to the Great Barrington Declaration, all that libertarian think tank that said we just need to let COVID run, and it's saying, and a number of people that were on that, including Bhattacharya and the other main writer, but this Brownstone Institute guy who's an anarcho-capitalist says that we need to look for reparations for the business victims of the coronavirus lockdowns. Like that's where this is moving to. So that's why this pandemic, this trucker blockade it's just for those freaks. It's for oligarchy.
In my opinion, I would say I've already thrown in with the truckers in the sense that I don't think the government should have these sorts of powers generally. Not the power to enforce a public health decree, but the power to, crack down on protests and like freeze their funds and shit like that. The larger question of like how we tackle that problem is, people are very willing to include like, again, right-wing content creators and how we tackle like a problem. I know how we tackle a problem. We have like a real government. Like the solution that a lot of these sort of like, pseudo-right, pseudo-left alliances try to promote is actually giving someone in the content creator world more money. which is not really a solution. That's not a viable solution to me as a leftist. It's like, I agree. I don't think the government should be allowed to crack down on any protests like this. The solution is to have a better government, not to watch Tucker Carlson's show to hear how like on this one issue we sort of kind of agree.
Bigger Truck Nuts writes in again, you should have Richard Wolff on the show to discuss the convoy and challenge his points if you think he's wrong. I got news for you, Bigger Truck Nuts. Maybe, but you're the one who brought up Richard Wolff. We did not out of nowhere bring it up. You characterize his point as something else. And so like I haven't even heard his full take.
You didn't characterize it.
Yeah.
Maybe we will.
Maybe. I mean, but the person who brought up Richard Wolff was you. I just want to make that clear. All right, let's take a call. Calling from an 817 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, is this me?
Yes, this is you.
Yeah, my name is Brandon. I'm originally from Texas, but I'm here in Los Angeles.
Let's go, Brandon.
Hello, Brandon.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I
sound kind of disappointed, Brandon.
No, I'm not disappointed. I just kind of got excited.
Oh, okay, cool.
I kind of forgot that Brandon was there.
What's up? Yeah. What's up?
Yeah, I was congratulating you on sharing my name. We're blood brothers in this war.
Let's go, Brandon.
Oh yes.
How about that?
Brandi, in fact.
Yeah. Well, I should also say that I'm also black as well. So.
Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations to all the black brands.
And I mean that superior. I mean that sincerely.
Yes. But I wanted to talk about. No.
So what you calling about, Brandon?
I wanted to talk about something I noticed in Los Angeles. I noticed it when I flew back from Texas from the holidays. I live in an apartment that's right next to the train tracks where all that, all the thefts were going on. And when I flew back, I noticed that there's a whole lot more trash on the train tracks than usual. And then about a couple of weeks ago, one of the trains got derailed like right next to my apartment. And there's an investigation into that, but I think that it's due to the fact that all that trash on the train tracks have probably led to that kind of derailment. And Gavin Newsom has been, down here. He kind of gave a press conference on, the derailment and all the thefts that were going on, and some of the stuff that people were stealing were like, COVID-19, testing kits and all that, or that kind of stuff was being left on the ground. And I kind of think, Newsom, from what I gathered from his press conference, he kind of characterized it as like some sort of like, organized criminal behavior. But that's not what I think it is, considering like all that how decrepit the trashing was. I think it's just people who are desperate for,
right,
for things to live off of, and they just discard the things they don't need. And I would think that
do you mind if I give some people a little more context really quickly, Brandon?
Well, I kind of connected to like the homelessness issue around here, because like at the same time I can literally see like 10 neighborhoods right outside my apartment on the street across from the railroad.
Yeah.
And so like yeah.
So this is from the website Jalopnik. 17 Union Pacific train cars derailed last week along the same tracks, experiencing mass looting in Los Angeles. Union Pacific recently blamed the staggering 160% increase in thefts on the DA, but the fault may lie, at least in part, with plain old short-sighted greed. The cars jumped the track in Lincoln Heights. No one was hurt, and Union. The derailment occurring is in a loading and unloading area where trains have to slow down or stop. Or occurred, I should say, which gives thieves time to do their dirty work. But anyone who has ever listened to a Tom Waits song knows railroads typically employ their own security forces. Los Angeles police told CBS LA officers typically don't interfere with railroad businesses unless asked by the company, which Union Pacific said in the press release it is now doing. So
a little bit more there. In that same press release, Union Pacific blasted LA District Attorney George Gaston as soft on crime due to his policy on not charging low-level defendants cash bails. So policy issue there. But it turns out that Union Pacific laid off an unspecified amount of workers, including railroad police, in September 2020. 2 months later, the thefts began. An employee who wished to remain anonymous told LA Taco that Union Pacific should be shouldering a little more of the blame for thefts. Union Pacific Police Department has jurisdiction over the 32,000 miles of track Union Pacific owns. Many of these special agents used to patrol this now from a stretch of track. According to sources, the number of patrol officers had been cut from 50 to 60 agents to 8. So what these companies are doing now.
Same thing in Duane Reade here in New York. When they're blaming on shoplifting, they're cutting staff who are unable to monitor some of this stuff.
They're using the opportunity of a reaction against defund the police to offload their security needs onto local police departments and have them foot the bill. Taxpayers foot the bill.
Yeah, and in that press release, like on a YouTube video, I look at the comments because I've kind of find comments to be like, like a fascinating read in like the response to these kinds of events.
Right.
And a lot of them like it just kind of like belie like a sort of a frustration with like a lack of policing in Los Angeles, and so like this kind of tells me that at least the Democratic Party around here is going to tailor their response along the lines of like increasing police budgets rather than as opposed to like increasing or investing in like housing initiatives and just making sure that people get fed around here.
Well, I appreciate the call, Brandon, and the extra context on that story. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Train Boy writes in, were the trains okay? All right, let's the IMs are just I triggered something. I'm not exactly sure. What?
I think with my maple syrup thing, people feel very strongly about maple syrup.
As they should. Well, we do have another right-wing take on the trucker convoy. Another favorite of the Majority Report here. He doesn't like us so much, but that is Steven Crowder. So, of course, he supports the trucker convoy. And there's something else that he supports here. He supports illegal border crossings, except only from the north and when they're white.
They can't enforce their rules in the United States. So if you live, I hope I'm not stepping on any laws here from other countries, but like if you live in Michigan or something like that, and some of those truckers are coming over, and you have local access to be able just letting them know that you support them, right? Yeah. If they're around there, like in your area, go do that. That's at the very least, that's going to be like solidarity.
I would love to see a freedom trucker convoy here in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would love to see that here in the United States, especially if it's as peaceful as it was in Canada.
I know.
And I would also love to see Canadians seek asylum. I mean, for crying out loud, if people can do it in a caravan from Honduras, why can't Canadians right now? Can they come to Michigan? Can they go to Michigan and claim asylum? Because they're actually
oppressive government.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Asylum, you do not seek asylum just because your country is not as good as the United States. Yeah. That's not asylum. But when the government is freezing your bank accounts and threatening to jail you for speaking out against the government, or my God, jailing pastors for still preaching when the government tried to shut them down, I can't think of a more clear-cut of a people claiming asylum. If the United States wants to actually care about immigrants claiming asylum, it would, at no point in our life, would that asylum rule, because it also has to be the nearest country.
Yes.
At no point in our life would it be more appropriate than Canadians right now fleeing Canada to the United States. We would have to grant them asylum. How about that? Can there be a movement to grant Canadians asylum?
Well, that's pretty transparent. Sorry, Brendan.
That is a hypothetical. Like this is not a thing. There is no Canadian that has, as far as I know, has come here and declared asylum to get from away from the tyranny that is Canada. I haven't heard about it. Have you guys heard of this scenario, or is Steven Crowder basically doing that thing where you invent a guy to get mad at, but for like a whole thing that's not even happening?
No, I think Steven Crowder's onto something. He's going to invent some sort of reverse underground railroad where he transports Canadians who are tired of having universal health care to a country where you can go bankrupt if you break your leg. If you break your leg. It's just like, it's just so transparent. These kinds of appeals, you almost don't even know who they're for, but I guess it's for so their audience can feel like they're catching the left in some hypocrisy, or catching liberals like, oh, liberals are so so in favor of illegal immigration, but they don't want this. It's all very it's all very sad, because it shows you how far we've gone down. That like these people who obviously do not believe anyone should have the right to protest, broadly speaking, because we've seen, hell, America has been making it legal to run over protesters who are blocking the road state by state since Black Lives Matter started.
Yeah.
And these people are more or less okay with that. And this is the one thing that they are not in favor of, and it's supposed to be some sort of glimmer of hope, but it just it strikes me as like this is how far the right wing has gone. Like they are transparently just asking everyone to be in favor of a portion of the population having extra rights.
I headlined this earlier in the show, but I just want to make clear how difficult it is for basically non-white people to get any sort of asylum in the United States. Now, it's a different categorization here with the Afghan refugees, because there's a different designation. I believe that it's something like humanitarian parole. That's what it's called. Of the 43,000 humanitarian parole applications the agency has received since July 2021, it has processed fewer than 2,000. So that is less than 5%. About 1,500 have been denied and 170 approved as of February 11th. So that's since the summer. Only 170 of these humanitarian parole these are Afghan allies who were living or hiding in Afghanistan or neighboring countries, basically. People who are of the skin color, most likely, that Steven Crowder would make fun of, but who the United States says help them in their efforts in Afghanistan. Only 170 out of the 43,000 humanitarian parole applications have been approved since that time period. And I mean, he's not even hiding that that his argument is a racist one, because truckers should be able to get asylum, no problem, even though they're not actually facing, despite what I agree was a really scary overreach by Justin Trudeau. Outside of that, they're not facing any dire consequences for their protests and their actions, except for the fact that they're not able to cross the border and do the trucking and do their job in the way voluntarily that they so desire. If these are even truckers that are mostly in part of this. But then there are people who the United States government says, you helped us here, but they're the wrong skin color. And even the Biden administration is barely approving their applications.
Yeah, I mean, has the Biden administration stopped not approving just immigration from the global south just because of COVID-19? Last I heard, they were still maintaining some of Trump's legal restrictions on immigration.
Title 42.
It's so literally Steven Crowder is asking that the truckers who are representing some sort of faction of the right be given asylum for something that we are actively currently denying for other people.
Yeah, so he's just, I mean, the asylum process in this country, let's just totally blow it up if you're white. We'll make it completely Byzantine if you're from a country that is a little bit too brown for our liking.
Well, immigration has always, I mean, immigrant has always been like a racialized category. One thing that happened, and I think consistently happened under the Trump administration, was people not realizing how many illegal Irish immigrants are in this country, or how many undocumented immigrants from other like white countries, European, Western European countries to be specific, are here undocumented. And there were just like these stories about people like 3,000 Irish American, or not Irish, undocumented Irish immigrants being deported or trying to be deported. I don't know what ended up happening to them, but like that's just, people are allowed to racialize these broad swath categories. And then when, again, same with the truckers, they get caught up in what is a systemic thing. They are trying to make appeals that the system should just not apply to certain types of people, but not in a racist way, in a way that is, behooves everybody. I mean, benefits everybody.
I mean, also how the whole immigration system can be bent basically at the whim of, let's say, like a major corporation that decides this is an issue that they care about. I mean, we see with like certain big tech companies where they get involved with immigration, and it's mainly so they could hire talent from overseas and bring them here. And that's fine, but that's how they frame the situation for them. And then, of course, that's when our government gets involved and makes sure that they can legally bring those people over as quickly as possible so they could get that slightly cheaper developer or programmer or whatever to labor. Of course, we don't think that way for like the blue collar workers working in farms and stuff who come from, Mexico or Central America or wherever.
I want to say, actually, I changed my opinion. I agree with Steven Crowder. We should have open borders. I've changed my mind immediately. I know this is a contentious issue. Open borders, though. I think Steven Crowder's position, I think the position of all of the people who are, I just recently called, disingenuous bigots, are actually true. We should have open borders. I think if we can agree to that, and we can agree to the truckers. My grandfather was a trucker. He was a unionized trucker, but he was a trucker.
Also, I think all Canadians, not just the truckers, but all of them are subject to that tyranny up there. They should all be able to vote in American elections.
Well, frankly, the Canadians, the polls I've seen, the Canadians don't even support the trucker protest, which is another example, I think, of the disingenuous, like overburdening, not overburden, but like the disingenuous way, like far right content creators are allowed to sort of like create the standards by which people are supposed to support their causes. Because, when Black Lives Matter was protesting, when people were protesting against police, or protesting in favor of police abolition, all we could see was how many like polls show that people sort of like the police. And like, yeah, but we know why people sort of like the police, a lot of like indoctrination into the police state. But in their case, we don't need polls to find out like whether or not this protest should be something that is supported, because in reality, they're allowed to stake out these like very, very unpopular claims, but do it under the guise of they're just defending the tree of liberty from tyrants and I guess patriots too.
The silent majority.
All right, calling from a 308 number. 308, who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it is Kowalski from Nebraska.
Kowalski, hello. Good to hear from you.
Yes, I'm not down by the river this time.
That's
Your
good.
guys' show is looking great today, and I just wanted to give a quick ag update and then my 2 cents on the trucker. I guess I'll just call it a convoy. Anywho, on the ag front, not much has changed weather-wise. Still persistent drought west of the Mississippi River, not looking great. South American harvest isn't expected to have much of a surplus, and due to international tensions, grain prices are at pretty much their all-time high, even surpassing last year, which is surprising given that prices normally peak around May. So, yeah, inputs will be a bit high, so I'm not sure if farmers are actually going to see much of an increase in income, but yeah, the market's pretty insane right now.
Right.
On the weather front, though, it is looking like we should be getting moisture come like summer, but things could be problematic in spring for those who do not have the benefits of irrigation. And due to lack of snowfall, a lot of areas are receiving too much heat right now, and exposed ground and exposed lakes, which aren't covered by ice and snow at the moment, are evaporating, which means the little bit of moisture that is in the ground is basically evaporating as we speak. So basically only the northern part of the Midwest is faring good on that side of things, but that's pretty much it for the ag stuff. As far as the trucker convoy goes, pretty much nothing about it makes much sense from what I understand. Just full disclosure, I do have a CDL and a pretty good number of friends who do truck for a living. And just the issues that a lot of truckers have is more or less the same that a lot of people have, like taxi drivers too, is that the workforce is becoming gigified. Mm-hmm. And there are these tracking devices that they have in trucks now. So ordinarily you used to keep a logbook, and I would never do this, but sometimes truckers would forge these books in order to get out of an area before an ice storm comes in, or to be able to get cattle to its destination without being basically trapped due to traffic issues. Sometimes you just need that extra hour or two. And with a lot of these electronic devices becoming more standardized, it's harder to basically overcome that impediment, which inherently makes truckers less valuable. And because of many state laws allowing people to drive semis without needing a CDL within states, a lot of very unqualified people are behind the wheels of trucks now, which not only hurts trucker wages, but it also makes it far less safe.
Yeah.
People with CDLs are statistically the safest people on the road because they are the most qualified drivers on the road, and you also have to pass certain health requirements to be on the road. So you might have truckers who look like they're completely out of shape, but if they have any heart problems, if they have any conditions like diabetes or something, they know about it because you have to get checked every 2 years minimum. But if you have these states that are deregulating the trucking industry, it's not as big of a deal. So a lot of issues with truckers is coming up from these kind of laws. The laws almost seem surgically designed to destroy the ability for truckers to have any type of freedom or ability to negotiate from a position of strength. So when you see these Canadian truck drivers protesting about COVID, that's kind of a drop in the bucket when you actually look at the larger trucking issues that are appearing across North America.
Yeah.
So that's why I just simply don't believe it's a legit working class thing. Otherwise, they would have a whole list of issues that they would be bringing before the government.
100%.
That's my view on it.
Yeah, and I just want to say just one final point on this, because I think your view on it should be a fairly easy to arrive at consensus. But this is from Teamsters Canada, February 7th, 2022. The real enemy for truckers is COVID-19. So I just want to say to folks, I will never get ahead of the fucking Teamsters when it comes to a labor action by truckers. Okay, if the Teamsters don't recognize this convoy as something that's going to be worthwhile for working class power, then fuck it. I'm sorry, that's all the authority I need there. And if you want a podcast that's going to get ahead of the Teamsters on stuff like that, I'm sure there's going to be a lot that are on offer for you, but it's not going to be the majority report.
Boom. Appreciate it, Kowalski.
Okay, is there one thing I could add with the Teamsters?
Yes.
A bit?
Yes.
Okay, so there are some people who say that the Teamsters are kind of like gangsters who throw their weight around and basically force laws through on truckers' behalf.
Yeah.
I would just like to point out to anybody who views it that way, that's correct. They're literally power.
That's how you exercise power. Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, that's healthy. So.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing, but I'll leave you with that. You guys have a good one.
Yeah, thanks, Kowalski. Yeah, people aren't used to the unions throwing their weight around like they used to, which is how it's actually supposed to go.
This is when conservatives talk about monopoly power, and what they mean is the monopoly of labor, and it's
yeah, right. I want to take money out of politics, and specifically union money. That's what you sometimes hear from them as well. But not the rest. I'm kind of okay with.
My grandfather was a steward for the Teamsters when he was a trucker. He spoke very proudly of his time, doing that sort of thing.
That's awesome.
It's awesome. That's one of the great traditions in America.
Our Revolution says the Teamsters are not the vanguard of the workers.
Who are podcasters?
Sam from Ottawa, 66% of Canadians support the use of the Emergency Act to get the truckers out. The municipal and provincial governments completely failed and left their citizens to the mercy of the terrorists. And they do that for description even before Trudeau expanded it. I'm very sympathetic with the local governments being unable to do anything about it. I just don't think freezing the bank accounts is something that should
Were
the
they not?
president be able to do so.
Were they
Dude.
not allowed to do anything about it, or they just choose not to? Because ultimately, we've seen like protests go out of control because local law enforcement refuses to do anything about it because they're loosely aligned with that sort of, with the ideology of the protesters. In many ways, that's what led January 6th to escalate in the way it did, because you had a lot of Capitol police officers just like waving people through, which is not to say we should have like police officers gunning down truckers or gunning down like protesters of any kind. It's just to say, a lot of the people complaining about this issue from the right, which is why it's not worth listening to, they support all of those things. They just don't like when it's applied to people who they view as useful to their own like goals. And so the question of whether this is a legitimate protest or not legitimate protest is sort of irrelevant to me from a practical standpoint, because like I said, I think the majority report supports all of the things that underlie all of the things that underlie people's right to protest, all things that not only underlie that, but underlie the right for people to not have to get to this point where they're, being gunned down in the streets. It's only like the far right content creators and like their enablers who pretend as though like this is the battleground that we are fighting for our civil liberties for. It's like that this is the one and only battleground that matters, the one that they agree to.
Big Trucker Nuts is continuing to write in. Richard Wolff has been on Majority Report multiple times for very informative and friendly interviews over the years. I've been listening to the show for a long time, and requesting that Wolff come on again to discuss an important story about labor and capitalism is not out of line or inappropriate. Please don't dismiss me like I'm an idiot. Thank you. Good sir, you brought up Richard Wolff. We didn't. You're not an idiot, but just check yourself a little bit, dude. White communists. We can support expanded rights to protest and still oppose specific protests. Ask what the protest is, then make a moral judgment. Should leftists support the 2017 Charlottesville rally because protests? The same goes for the right-wing trucker protests. It's okay, even necessary, to oppose them. The Rights Project is to drain moral context from language and action. Good point. Until atrocity becomes equivalent to anything else. And a fascist rally is the same as an MLK march. Very well said.
I mean, it is very interesting how different. I mean, the IAMR brought up the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, which literally is pretty much, I would say, by most people, seen as a far right, neo-Nazi white supremacist event that happened in Charlottesville. And basically, if they had the wherewithal or knowledge of what's going on today, they could have very convincingly probably pulled the hood over some people's eyes by just saying, "Oh no, we're a workers' movement." I'm wearing a hard hat. They could have just brought some gear to make it look like they were some sort of labor rights movement or something, and then boom. They could have just claimed that, and I'm sure there would have been a lot of suckers all over, honestly, and even on the left who would have said, "No, those are workers fighting against the capital." Come on, this is ridiculous that we're even having this. I'm honestly shocked how long this conversation's even going.
Yeah, which is
crazy.
Which is why we might not get around to that conversation with Wolff, frankly.
Well, I mean, I would say. The Unite the Right rally, to your point, was disguised as a free speech thing. And so in many ways, the abstraction of what they're there for and who the leaders and organizers actually are and what their underlying politics was, it's just part of the comment mentioned, part of the right wing and also the far right neo-fascist wing's game to launder neo-fascist talking points, launder in more authoritarianism into our system. But, in some cases to leave themselves immune to that authoritarianism. In many ways, the same thing they're doing with the truckers, which is trying to tout them out as this white working class, somewhat confused, somewhat noble population. is the same with what they excused many of the people who at the free speech rally was, which is that, they're not there because of the Nazism. They're there because of free speech or all these other sort of coded terms. And, I don't find it that impressive that, the people who want us to feel so much sympathy for like these people who get caught up in these far right schemes, like whether it be Unite the Right rally or, trucker convoy, are then subject to the same rules that those same people who want us to feel sorry for them support. But also they don't want us as the left to go after sort of those structural reasons for why, people get caught up in this. Like, we're not allowed to tackle misinformation in any real way. We're not allowed to teach people what Nazism is in schools anymore, despite what Dave Rubin says. We just have to sort of teach lessons that are vaguely pro-American. And then when people fall through the cracks of our propaganda system, I guess we just have to feel bad for them depending on who they are.
And it's so funny, like the way these things are met, right? Like the Black Lives Matter protests with all this concern trying of, wouldn't you get more support if you did it this way or had a slogan this way? Whereas like this protest comes and it's none of that. It's actually why it's our fault for not jumping in with both feet and saying like, oh, these folks that like in their and I don't think this is unfair, in their online chats like have people wondering if Hitler like was misrepresented by history, right? Like, fuck those people. I'm sorry. Like, and again, I just think it's ridiculous when the actual like organizations that should respond to this sort of action, like again the Teamsters, are like see right through it, like that this becomes even a conversation for podcasts. Like it's silly to me.
All right, let's get to one more clip because we have to lose Binder shortly at some point. What do you recommend, Bradley?
Do you want Charlie Kirk talking about basketball? Basketball?
Wow.
Does he say it like that?
No, it's about him on an all-white basketball team.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay, sure.
I'm still not understanding why Bradley's speaking that way, but
I'm getting a lot of feedback when I talk. I can hear myself. I'm like slurring my words.
You're also very loud. Like, is your mic turned up?
Yeah,
way
you might
loud?
need to turn your mic down a little bit. All right, he'll figure it out.
Himself in delay. That's why.
Have you tried Relief Factor? I hear it took Charlie Kirk to the next level.
Okay. Well, so it's six. All right, so Charlie Kirk is talking about sports, but only in the context of vaccine denialism. Novak Djokovic did an interview the other day where he said that he'd give up being the greatest tennis player ever for his righteous cause of not taking the COVID vaccine that's been administered billions of times at this point.
I mean, no offense to tennis, but we'll be okay.
Yeah. Right. And come on, I used to watch a little bit of tennis in my day. He's not greater than Roger Federer or Rafael Nadal.
It's like leaders of ISIS. There'll be a new greatest tennis player.
Right. And perhaps we could also just say Serena Williams. With that said, here he is with his musings on a all-white basketball team. I don't even know how he makes this transition, but here we go.
But in order to push back against a lot of this nonsense, it's going to take courageous truth tellers. And honestly, someone that I have not spent, I don't think, any time on this program talking about, but I have a great deal of respect for the Kyrie Irvings of the world and the Novak Djokovic's of the world. Now, I grew up with a lot of Serbs in Chicago. I have a soft spot for Serbs. They're awesome. I know the worst thing you could say in the Serbian language, and I will not say it on air because the FCC would find some way to still find me. I played on a Serbian basketball team, actually. My name was Sheva Krkovic. I kid you not. I have a jersey that says Krkovic. The name of our basketball team was the Illinois White Eagles. Boy, you couldn't call a team that anymore. We were all white. Basketball team. And we meant nothing racial about it. Of course not, because we actually lived in America that was awesome. We used to play all black basketball teams, and we used to get along. I kid you not. We were an all white.
Wow.
Everyone else was Serbian except me, but I kind of looked the part a little bit. Kind of look a little bit like I'm from the Balkan Peninsula. I could pull off a Croatian, Bosnian, Albanian, Serbian kind of deal. And we would go to the basketball tournament, AAU, which is really competitive basketball, and like Waukegan or Zion Benton and Elgin. We'd travel all across the country, and we'd play these all black teams, and no one cared. It was never like this racial thing. No, it's like we all got along and we all like hung out. It would be like all white team versus all black team, and we never thought anything of it. I kid you not. There was never a moment ever, and this is a little bit of a detour, where all of a sudden we
Where
were
you
like,
said
yeah, we're
something
the
in the
white team.
locker
We're like,
room?
yeah, we just kind of all know each other, and they all know each other from like a Serbian community. It's kind of cool, and it was that.
So you're okay. So basically, his argument is that they were cordial to one another. So I don't know how he got there from saying I admire Novak Djokovic and which he mispronounced, and Kyrie Irving for their vaccine stances, and then he goes on some diatribe where he says, and I quote, "I have a soft spot for Serbs," which is a normal way to view human beings.
Yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
Okay, it's also just weird because he's like 28 years old and he speaks like he's a 60-year-old who was like playing basketball at a segregated high school back in like the 50s or whatever. And like it's just
He's
like
on
this
Glory Road, and he thinks that that's like his life, basically.
he's gonna like recount the plot of the movie Pride with Terrence Howard, where it's like just the where they don't allow like black people to swim. So, you know, but he had an all-white swim team, I imagine. It's just weird that I think this this level of like under 30 or like millennial like right-wing content creators are very weird because all of their stories just sound incredibly fake because they're just like, you know, back in my day, it's like your day. Like, we had an all-white basketball team. That usually only happens in shows like Riverdale.
How are his politics worse than Remember the Titans?
Yeah, it's like, it's the opposite message of Remember the Titans. Just look at how much happier people are when they have an ethnic-based sports team, and they don't even think about it. Like,
And that's like the most like, you know, everybody in that movie everybody in today's America is like, that is so heartwarming, basically, unless you're cynical about it like me. But so his politics are behind that.
Yeah. Also, just the White Eagles, in quotations, paramilitary. This is a Wikipedia entry. The White Eagles, also known as the Avengers, were a Serbian paramilitary group associated with the Serbian National Renewal and the Serbian Radical Party. Just skipping a little bit head down. Testimony at the International War Crimes Tribunal indicates that the White Eagles were responsible for a number of atrocities, including during the Croatian and Bosnian Wars, including the Vošin massacre, Visegrad massacre, crimes in, I don't know how to pronounce all these, but Foča, Gacko, and others. Various members of the White Eagles were indicted by the tribunal. Mitar Vasiljevic received a 15-year sentence. Former head Milan Lukic received a life sentence for his war crimes, which include murdering men, women, and children. Can't name teams like that anymore, though.
Yeah, you can't. Back in my
Can't name
day,
your Serbian Chicago basketball team after a group that's on the other side of the world doing war crimes.
why can't he decide if he's going to be 19 or if he's going to be 86?
It's a weird thing with Kirk because he's like canceled sports before, like the Kaepernick thing. Basically, like he's a guy that doesn't like sports. He's like Steven Crowder, right? But that goes against masculinity, right?
Yeah.
You're not supposed to not know anything about like what sport Magic Johnson played if you're a man, and that's the problem Kirk has. So I think he's like in a rush to sort of like have sports takes. You know, he was in that supplement commercial throwing a football around.
I do remember that.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't think he can name like 5 athletes.
I'm desperately looking for photos.
I'm honestly so confused by that clip. I mean, I don't even with the tangents he went on. I still don't understand what his point was, because it weaved in 3 different like half of points. I just that's all I have to say. I mean,
it's like a Rorschach test.
Bizarre, just bizarre.
I love a good tangent, but I was going to say I'm desperately searching for a photo of this basketball team. I have got to find this.
Please.
I can't find them.
If you do find it, send it around. All right, we're going to take one final call. Calling from a 266 foreign number, I believe. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
This is you.
I'm calling from a Skype number.
Oh,
my
Skype
name's
number.
Nick. I'm calling from Manitoba.
Manitoba.
Not like you're the only person who knows where that is.
No, I know where that is. Yeah, I mean it's you've been there? That's helpful because we've just spent a good portion of the show talking about the Canadian truckers.
Oh yeah, and I've been listening to the whole thing, and I'm sorry to give more on it.
No,
There's
go ahead.
a couple things. first off, I want to apologize. In Sam's debate with Jackson Hinkle had mentioned that you guys don't really get any views on anything except for your Jimmy Dore videos. That's me. I sometimes listen to you guys make fun of right-wingers to help myself fall asleep.
We appreciate it.
I apologize for that.
We appreciate it, and those videos are some of our best. So I have
To be honest, they're good for views, but we do a much higher. Trump stuff, frankly, does a lot higher.
Well, and also Hinkle doesn't really seem to understand that you guys do other things besides YouTube.
Yeah, well,
but
I mean,
that's beside the point.
That's because that sort of thing would be beyond his capacity to do
Right.
interviews like this.
I cannot comprehend a world outside of YouTube drama. But anyway, so what you calling about?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the truckers. There's two aspects to this that I haven't really heard from anybody, and I'd love to hear refuted by like Hinkle, Dore, Carlson, or Richard Wolf. One is the way that trucks, like there's two kinds of truckers. Some are just drivers and they're employees, and then some are owner operators. And I haven't seen any like reporting on this or anything, but my guess is that a lot of the trucks that are actually involved in this protest, which of course includes a lot of other people, but I'm guessing a lot of those are, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars that are owned by the people driving them, which isn't quite the same as your typical blue collar worker that doesn't actually literally own the means of production. And so like, I get that mainstream news isn't really going to cover that, but to see that get skipped over in discussions with people that are supposedly on the left or on the right wing who are making this out to be some sort of worker phenomenon, it seems a little disingenuous.
I think you've got that right.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, Colin.
And sorry, just one more thing. Like, if this was a real worker protest, if like the text of it is, we don't want these vaccine mandates or whatever, the subtext would also be something worker related. But with these guys, the subtext is like, hang Trudeau, the Jews are taking over,
yeah,
and we're going to terrorize the city of Ottawa to prove a point, which is not really like in keeping with anything that we know about normal protests.
All great points.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also wanted to ask you before you leave, caller, are you aware of where Flin Flon is in Manitoba?
No, I'm not. I'm just in Winnipeg. I'm like
gotcha.
a 2-minute walk away from the provincial capital, so I've been hearing some horns and stuff, but it's mostly died down. They gave in on just honking their horns on the top of every hour, and now they're just hanging out. Like, there's no noise from there. They're just
having a good time.
Not like
little
on tractors. It's
little ice cream social. All right. Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Take care, you guys.
Bye.
All right,
All
guys.
right. We have to say goodbye to Binder. Yeah.
I gotta jump, but before I go, I just have to share this really funny thing that I found. I found the old Illinois White Eagle Twitter account that hasn't been updated since the year 2011. The last tweet was Serbfest this week. But interestingly, I found one of the first tweets that it tweeted out. This is obviously the Twitter account of Charlie Kirk's basketball team. March 15th, 2010, Charlie Kirk will be taking over operations of this Twitter account. And so he's the one running the account. And then just how many months later, about a year later, he's still running the account, it seems, but scouting report. 6'4" Charlie Kirk of the FP White Eagles improved his stock this AAU season. Strong, athletic, 22.5-inch vertical, hashtag keep watch.
22.5, you're 6'4", you're not going anywhere with that. I'm sorry.
There you go. And also, there's literally just one photo that this account ever posted. And it's an old photo of Charlie Kirk wearing his I don't know what kind of gear this is. It doesn't look like
Oh my God! Did like so? Is there any evidence that there were anybody else on this team? There was anybody else on this team except?
I mean, there are people standing around him, but you can't see them because it's cropped just to focus on his face.
Can you see it? Can you send it to us?
I just dropped it in the chat there. I don't know if you could pull it up on the feed, and then I got to jump.
All right, cool.
This was a lot of fun, guys. Pretty good, right?
Is that? It looks like he's playing lacrosse or something.
Yeah.
I have my doubts that this is the what Eagles
That's
what?
a strange basketball jersey. If that's
That looks like a football.
Although they did do those briefly in like 2011, 13.
Yeah, but that's
12.
not doesn't track with this, right? All right, Binder, thank you for that tidbit.
Yep, youtube.com/Matt Binder, 9 p.m. Eastern time tonight. Scameconomy.com. Take care, guys. See you all next week.
See you next week.
Yeah.
Go on, Brandon.
I was just saying goodbye to Matt. The whole picture thing with Charlie Eagle and the White Eagles is all very weird. Like just looking at it, just seems like he's in front of a backdrop, like he's getting ready for an MMA fight or something.
Right.
This is very funny that he was tweeting about his draft. What is AAU stock going up? Like, I need some game film.
All right, let's read like 10 more IMs and then we are gonna jump. Josh from Tucson, Ice Cream Social. All right, let me hang up. Sorry, callers. Ice Cream Social. They should invite Nancy Pelosi. Yes. Custodial artist. Charlie Kirk is the right's perfect grandson. Right? Oh God, like saying everything they want to hear. Although I mentioned before that I had my grandpa was like a democratic socialist, but socialist probably. And so he was based. He would like if he knew what I was doing now, he'd love that. So
What were the drivers to that? Do you know?
he was he grew up he was very poor, and I think was like he went to college, was the first in his family to go to college, had some emotional and mental issues, and I think had a hard time keeping jobs, and was basically found that this was incredibly frustrated his whole life that the state did not have a good safety net, and so as a result my mother grew up on food stamps and things like that, and his wife, my grandmother, was Finnish from that kind of had that social safety net, Finland is an incredible country in that way, so he learned about it through her, and then he became very academically focused on that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know. So that was I should ask my mother more about the roots of that for him, but that's what I know of it. Left is hard to understand, writes in Emma. Do you think left and progressives in online content creation universe can be a bit light on the way they communicate? So many heavy jargon words we use. The right wing speaks in language that is dumb, racist, but easy to understand. For example, if Brandon and Matt talk for 10 minutes, my elder brother or my dad will actually ask 10 questions on what some of the words actually meant, or of them might actually go back to watching an ant climb the wall. I think there might have been some typos there. But I mean, I think that there are some shows out there that do that, that speak in plain. I mean, I think honestly, TYTs are really great. And that's no shade on that situation. I mean, that's literally what inspired. I mean, Jank was my hero, and I still love him.
He meets people where they are.
Yeah, he's just he. That's what that show is designed to do. Is to bring people to the left in that way. So yeah, I think that's what is different about the tone of this show and that show. But so yeah, or at least Jank in particular, I would say.
Yeah, but I don't think the vocabulary is the reason for shifts to the right or to the left. Because I mean, you get into the right, you get into esoterica regards to markets and shit like that are completely bullshit as well, but just justify property owners being taxed less.
Yeah. The Emo Dragon. Hey, Emma, do you know where to find good statistics and origins of no-knock warrants and actions we can take to advocate to our local bodies of government to end this policy? I don't know. That is a good question.
You can look for the feed of Alec Karakatsanis. What's the group that he's with? Let me just look that up for you. It is, we had him on Left Reckoning. Why is, Alec, I put, 1 second. Civil rights. Yep, the Civil Rights Corps. He's at Equality Alec.
Union Jack, Emma, Matt, can you share an update on the interview with Christian Smalls? He is such an inspiration, doing everything possible to fight Amazon. Not sure why you haven't interviewed him yet. He has been on Jimmy Dore, for God's sake.
We had him on TMBS back in the day. We should have him back on.
It's on our list, our running list. Bradley has it written down. We're figuring it out. I promise you. Misleading Shart. Okay. Vosh, love him or hate him, has a really good argument about the bank freezes of truckers in Canada. Essentially, he says that the bank freezes normalize covert exercising of state power on protest movements, regardless of whether or not they are justified, allowing for the government to do certain anti-protest actions without form of accountability. Kind of shocking that people who identify as leftists are in favor of the bank freezes. I couldn't agree more.
I agree, but that's already happening. Like, the government is already taking covert actions to disrupt protests and to assassinate members of protest movements. That's just already happening. And I think, I'm not familiar with this Vosh character you're talking about, but I think that that's an issue that a lot of right-wing content creators, or even just like people who are new to like the history of like oppression, make, where it's like, oh, I've just noticed that this is happening to a group of people who it hasn't happened to. Have we normalized it happened to already? And that must going to make it be extra or normalized. Like it's it's already happening to like marginalized groups across the board. But if it happens to
money for Palestinians.
Yeah.
I mean, one time someone asked me when I was like, it's funny Nazis get punched in the face. They were like, what happened if the government decided that you, or people decided that you, by nature of who you are, that you should get punched in the face? I'm like, okay, well, that already exists. That's called racism. And so like,
exactly.
and a lot of the right-wing content creators world is just like, all of the systemic bigotries that we always talk about just simply don't exist, really. And so we should focus on like these new things that are burgeoning, like, oh, the January 6th movement, and those people going to jail and finding out that, yeah, the prison industrial complex is really bad and really serious. But my point to that would be like, we already know what it looks like when you don't believe that certain portions of a to be honest, a privileged population deserve to be subject to the same draconian laws that other people who are, traditionally oppressed are. We know what that looks like when it becomes a politician. It's just Major Taylor Greene. Like we know, like we've seen it in a bunch of Republicans. It's like there's nothing. I guess that's my big takeaway. There's nothing surprising that there's nothing surprising or even like encouraging about the fact that right-wing content creators sometimes take the position that they and their analogs deserve better and more rights than we do. And also, it's just transparently like a fundraising grift for like content creation. How that equals into like more structural reforms is like a question mark. But, it's clear that the goal is not to support protest movement generally, at least not directly. It's to funnel money to content creators, left or right. And that's just not a solution to the problem.
Yeah. I mean, well said. We're going to do two more. Emma Crew, have been a long-time listener, finally subscribed, and I'm so happy to send an IM. One criticism, though, why do you spend so much time reacting to mainstream media and so little time highlighting stories for places like Jacobin? Did you read the latest awesome piece about Biden continuing Trump policy on privatization of Medicare? Such stories need deep dives and awareness. I think that's a fair criticism. That is why I tried to do a deep dive into this Amazon ICE story, which, okay, fair critique about me making a joke about that. That was in poor taste. But I care about this kind of stuff. I'm trying to highlight The Intercept here. Great piece. So you guys should all check out. And I hope to do more of that.
Yeah, I mean,
in the future,
it's sort of a first half thing, because we do have Jacobin people on regularly to talk about articles on the first half. The react to the mainstream media thing is because in part we've talked about this before, but it's defensive, right? It's defense against major media narratives, and it's propagating off like your own narratives is important too, and like I said, that's why we do interviews. But I think like as far as what makes fun content to react to and is useful for folks, I think a lot of people come here to look for how you react to what like Fox or even MSNBC is saying.
Yeah, and frankly, we that was a lot of what the Peacock show reported was me highlighting those exact people. We would do a half-hour interview on an article, and there's a vacuum there to be had. I want to incorporate some of those elements into the show.
I would also say, I take it as a point of pride. I've never learned anything from anyone else. So that's just my personal take. But also, there's nothing wrong with catharsis. I think some people like the show as a fun little diversion from more serious news. And there is nothing wrong with having that, especially if you're also doing the other stuff. I think that, some people hate to say it, a lot of grad students out there think that every show has to be like a book report. And there is value in that. But, sometimes it's also just fun to have a good time and like, confirm the ultimate, not the ultimate truth. Yes. Confirm the ultimate truth that like the left is best. It's okay for leftists, even in the fake, even in the face of like, it's okay for people who like are actually leftists in the face of like overall oppression to just like circle the wagons and laugh at how like dumb everyone on the right is, because that's just the way being in an in-group is. And that doesn't mean we should be sort of exclusionary, but it is part of like what makes our group, part of what makes what should make our group more attractive is that like, yeah, we know we can point out that they're silly. It's when it gets into like the back and forth debates with people who clearly don't believe what they're saying, that it's like, that's just a waste of time.
All right, the final two. I will also say I'm not like the boss, so I do try to whatever. Not that Sam's doing anything wrong. I don't know why I even just shut up, Emma. Okay. Margot from Mass, my girlfriend who doesn't listen regularly was upset by the tone of the IM she overheard. She says, "Good job, Emma." Thank you, Margot from Mass's girlfriend. And the final IM of the day. Well, that was a question for Binder. Okay, he's the wonder here. H-Dub, my boss showed up with a ball cap on and a bullhorn and said his rights are under attack, so I gave him every cent in my bank account because I support workers. Incredible. All right, awesome. In absentia, thank you, Binder and Matt and Bradley and Brandon. I think very successful.
I'd say perfectly adequate as a launch. Ryan Grimm had a very funny intro on Ryzen where it's like, we have a perfectly adequate show for you today. And anyway, speaking of Ryan, we got him tomorrow, right?
Oh, yes, we do have him tomorrow. Maybe he'll address his controversial tweets. Oh, yeah. Love Ryan. All right, see you guys tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and